Okay, so it is 7:32. I'll call the meeting to order. And we'll start with citizen comments. Natalie, remind me how we're going to execute citizen comments now that we actually, I think, we do have one submitted in advance, or was somebody going to be?
Yeah, I did have one submitted in advance from JC Herman. Oh, looks like she's here. She just joined us. Hi, JC.
I see her name, but I don't see video. Do you see her yet?
No. I've also opened up everybody has access to this chat room that we'll be using tonight. So if there is a citizen comment from someone that I did not get an email from, feel free to just notify us in the chat room at this time. And that's a way for us to know that you want to speak as well. JC, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you do not want to make a comment, that's fine.
Isn't her mic on mute?
Oh, it does look like she's on mute.
Yeah. Everyone has the ability to unmute themselves at this point, so. I think that's a no.
And Natalie, can you unmute her just in case that's the issue? I don't know if you.
I did. I requested an unmute.
Oh, okay.
She has to accept that.
Okay. I just want to give her a minute then, because since we know she wanted to speak, I just want to leave that open for just a minute here.
Martha?
Yes.
While we're waiting to see if JC, it looks like she's gone. Is it okay if I just take a moment to introduce Wes, who just joined us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Hi, Wes. You can unmute yourself. Just really quickly, this is Wes Shavers. He's been an employee with Ridgeville for quite a few years now, as well as a camper. He's grown up in the district. He's actually our intern this summer. He has been like the most awesome in the past few weeks, helping me get the virtual camps off the ground. I just wanted him to, be able to see all your faces and say hello and to introduce him to you. So Wes, you're welcome to say anything if you'd like to. You certainly don't have to, but this is Wes.
Hi, Wes.
Hello.
Hello, Wes.
Nice to meet everybody. It's been a real treat being able to see Ridgeville from every perspective. And I was really interested to see kind of what goes on behind the scenes this summer, more than what it's like to be a camper, or what it's like to be a director or like a junior counselor. So I really applaud all the work you guys do, and I'm super excited to just kind of learn from this experience working with everyone.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Thanks, Wes.
Thanks, Wes. You're the best. I did just get a message from JC. It looks like her computer is rebooting itself, so she said she'd be back in one moment.
Okay.
Okay, let's give her a moment then.
So while we're waiting, there was some problems with the last board meeting because we did it by Zoom and nobody has any training on doing these by Zoom. And reviewing the board meeting, it's not easy to see who was talking, who wasn't talking, how people voted. And also, I think I sent you an email, there's been some changes to state statute. So I did speak with Martha and Brian about and Natalie about how we can take some steps to make the meeting run smoothly. And I figured as long as we're waiting, I'll just bring it up. What we want to do is make sure only one person is talking at a time, and that everybody introduces themselves, because even though we can all see everybody on the screen, it doesn't necessarily record that way on Zoom. So just keep that in mind as the meeting goes through. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. Natalie, have you heard anything else from her? Any updates?
No, I told her that we were waiting. I think technology is just not on her side at this moment.
Okay, so I mean, would we be able to, we haven't really been in this boat before, would we be able to start and as soon as she tunes in, we can hear from her? Or I don't know, Charlie, if we're allowed to kind of go backwards like that, but.
No, I think we're in unprecedented situation, and we need to do whatever we can to make the meeting flow better and make it proceed, while trying to give everybody their fair say. And I think it makes sense here, unless some board member objects, I think it makes sense here to move the meeting forward. And if she comes on the line, maybe she is right now, she can speak then, if everybody's okay with that.
I guess raise your hand, board members, if you agree that that's okay. Okay, and there she is, actually.
Hi there. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting. My technology is not wanting to keep up with all you today.
No worries. So JC, we are in citizen comment, and so you have the floor as of now, if you'd like.
Thank you. I was just curious. I had gotten wind of the possibility of somebody suggesting the park district being dissolved. As a resident, I was curious what that means for my tax dollar. I'm assuming if Ridgeville's not taxing me, that the city of Evanston's going to be taxing me. And I would like to know if we're going to have some sort of, guaranteed freeze in place. I can't imagine that the city of Evanston is going to tax us less than Ridgeville. And I would also like to make sure that programming continues if the park district goes into the hands of the city. So I was curious on those two levels in terms of taxes and programming. What would happen if something like that were to take place?
Okay, so I usually like to make a reminder when we're in citizen comment that the structure doesn't allow for discussion, unfortunately. It's just a place for comments. And you can certainly ask questions, but we're not in a position to answer them directly. But definitely thank you for saying those things. And, an answer to those questions would certainly be appropriate. It's just not something we can do directly at this time. Did you have anything else additional to say or ask, or?
No, it was just that. I'm curious.
Okay, thank you.
You.
And Natalie, did you receive notice of any other advanced citizen comments? Okay, and anyone else who's tuning in at the moment, now's your time if you'd like to make a comment. Okay. So instead of moving on in the agenda to the approval of the minutes, I'd actually like to motion that we move up new business point number, sorry, there's so many of them. Board etiquette, it's number D. So I'm moving to move that up the agenda to be discussed now briefly.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
You did, yeah.
And Charlie, do we need to vote also, or is it just a second?
Yes, we're going to do a vote, and we're going to do a roll call vote.
Okay, so Julie, if you could execute the roll call vote, please.
Braun,
Yes.
Coyne,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
and Mitchell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So It was my intention to put a document together for us to discuss. The document would be based on the IAPD webinar that I recently participated in, which was talking about the bill 2135, which the governor is due to sign any day. I don't really know when to expect that, but in the event that the governor does not extend the declaration of a disaster, which is otherwise set to expire on June 27th, Bill 2135 would be providing for certain tools and rules and guidelines and relating to how we continue to conduct ourselves. And there would be some changes to what we're doing now. One of those things, and we'll cross this bridge when we come to it, is of course that we would have the option, if we determine that it's feasible, practical, safe, etc., to open back up into a physical meeting. That's not something that that I feel like we need to discuss at this moment, but that's something that's on the horizon. Again, if that disaster declaration does not get extended, and if nothing else happens except the signing of this bill 2135, certain things would come into existence. But what I learned through this webinar was also just general information about these virtual meetings and how we should be conducting them. Obviously this is uncharted territory for all of us. Nobody's done this before. We started doing it, and there's no established rules for how to do it. The default should have been, and I just want to make it clear, that conduct in these meetings is supposed to be as similar to how we would conduct ourselves in person as possible. Just because we're home doesn't mean that we're, talking to our family members the whole time, eating, drinking, showing up at the meeting in our pajamas, really, engaging in anything other than participating in the meeting actively as we would if we were present all together in the same room. So I imagine that most of this is very common sense, very straightforward, something that we would not necessarily disagree on. But I did want to open it up to discussion if anyone felt they wanted to, add to it, talk about it. Like I said, I wanted to actually have a bulleted list in place because of various things that came into my life today unexpectedly. I didn't fully achieve that, and I just don't want to reveal it in its draft form because it's just not finalized. But as I said, it's mostly about conduct, but it does involve some more specific logistical things. Bill 2135, I think, will be requiring that every single vote in a virtual meeting is done by roll call. And it was recommended in that webinar that we just go ahead and do that as of now. So that is one of my specific recommendations, that we, as of right now, move to a roll call vote for everything. Unfortunately, even moving to adjourn, etc. Literally everything we would vote on would be roll call. And Charlie, can you just confirm that you think that's the best practice for us?
I do think that's the best practice. If for some reason we decide that it gets cumbersome the way it is, then we'll just move to each commissioner saying their name and yes or no. But for now, we should keep it as it is.
Okay. As we have done roll call previously, you mean, with Julie conducting it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And some other items that were discussed, just to put these out there, because I would like to, put them out there verbally, and then I'll put them in writing subsequent to this meeting. It was recommended that everyone participate by computer instead of by phone if they have the ability to do so. The reasons given at the webinar were that the audio and the visual are more likely to be of a higher quality on a computer than on a phone. And possibly that there would be, less likelihood of interruptions to technology. As we know too, Zoom functions a little bit differently on a computer than it does on a phone. And so you have a more full and complete command of what Zoom has to offer if you're on a computer. So, again, after this meeting, it obviously wouldn't be fair to expect that that's done as of tonight. But moving forward, if people can participate by computer, that's the recommendation. Just a reminder again from IAPD that we're still tabling non-essential business. So that is still what we're operating with right now. Obviously notwithstanding anything that has been specifically agreed upon that we'll be talking about. there's also just there were also some recommendations, I should say reminders of conduct that otherwise would have already been present in meetings. And so the reminder just that we operate under Robert's rules. Things have gotten a bit too lax in terms of the way we are all conducting ourselves in meetings, when people speak, constant interrupting, not asking to be recognized when it's time to speak. So at this point, I would like to request that we adhere more closely to Robert's rules starting immediately. Even in virtual meetings, it should be the same as it should have been before. If you would like to speak, you would ask to be recognized. And given that we are in this virtual setting, the recommendation I'll make and ask that everyone, conduct themselves as follows, if they're okay with this, is that when you would like to speak, you can raise your hand at any time. And Natalie will be recording via the group chat functionality, which she already mentioned. And so we'll actually do a little bit of an exercise real quick to make sure everybody can do that. So you'd raise your hand actually physically, okay? Then Natalie is going to see that. She's going to note it in the group chat, which everyone sees. As soon as you see that it's been noted, you don't have to keep raising your hand and you'll be in line. The next person who raises their hand, and Natalie will note it, they're next in line, and and it will follow from there. And so whoever happens to be speaking, then when I resume, once the floor has been, given back to me as president, I will proceed to recognize people who want to speak next. And given that we haven't done this very officially, as far as I've been on the board again this term, we'll do our best. I think that everyone could probably stand to brush up on Robert's rules, and we'll figure that out later if we need to do that more formally. So Natalie, I think we should actually experiment with that just real quick to make sure everybody can do it. So if anyone just wants to raise their hand as though they were going to be next in line, just go ahead and do it. Okay, and then Natalie would do what she's going to do. And so I saw something pop up. It says, from Natalie Sallee to everyone. And if I click on it, it says, well, it actually says Dan, Debbie. So again, we're all learning, yep, but that would mean that, Dan raised his hand first, he would speak first, Debbie would speak next. And, as we go through the meeting, Natalie would add people's, and I don't know, Natalie, will it just show up as one consecutive list of names then in terms of an order?
Yeah, unless somebody else types something, everything for me will just show up in a list.
Okay. I don't know if we have the option to maybe type some dots whenever there's sort of to create a break so that when I'm looking at that list, I don't have to look through 13, 15, 20, if we can kind of experiment with trying to make that more clear. And I would also say that with the group chat, again, unless anyone feels differently, I don't think we should be typing too much in the group chat unless for some reason absolutely necessary, because it's just logistically hard to listen and type at the same time or read things in text. Furthermore, the meeting, for the public's sake, and all of these guidelines are for the sake of the public, it's a little too complicated, I think, to have text communication too. Furthermore, it's not something we would be doing in our in-person meetings. And in the interest of trying to just, have an analog as much as possible here for what we would be doing in person, I don't think we should be using the chat except for the queue of names. So again, if people could raise their hands if they agree with that, just so we can get a sense of it in the moment.
Martha,
Yes, Dan, you have the floor.
I'm going back to your original proposal, which I understood to say that this is a recommendation coming from the state on guidelines for elected officials during the crisis and during Zoom meetings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what you're proposing, number one, what I heard was, let's really focus on Robert's rules. And I just want to say that I affirm that 100%. I think that's very good practice. I would like us to just take one cautionary reflection on all that you said about how to get on the floor or in line to speak as an elected person. Some of us may not have video at a particular Zoom meeting. They might be dialing in by phone, so there might not be a screen. So I think we need to have some grace in that protocol for our regular voice.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, Dan. Actually, you know, it was considered and discussed between myself and Brian and Natalie and Charlie, the option of actually having everyone, the commissioners that is, on mute by default and executing the meeting such that people would be unmuted once they are recognized. And ultimately, I decided that that was a bit too cumbersome and a bit too controlling. And then there were also some logistical concerns, and you just raised one of them, which is that if everybody participating is on mute by default, if that meant that anyone was calling in, there's no visual to go like this. And also, if you're literally using a phone, I don't know if Zoom offers any telephonic options for raise hand. I think that raise hand functionality would probably only exist in, you know, a screen-based use of the software. So, you know, again, I'm sorry I don't have all the answers. We're all kind of like learning as we go here and figuring this out. But that is a good point, and that's part of the reason that I would like everyone to be able to speak if they need to. If you are unable to raise a hand and get recognized, or there's any kind of technological problem and you need to draw attention to yourself about that, absolutely. You know, people can speak when they feel that they need to, and we'll deal with that as we go. It's just that if we have a constant speak whenever you want, free for all, interrupting people, yelling, it doesn't work. It's not the way we're supposed to be conducting ourselves, and we all know that. And it's not a reprimand, it's just a reminder so that we can all get back to the way that we're supposed to be conducting these meetings. And so let me just, quickly look at my notes to see if there's anything else that I wanted to make sure is part of that. I just wanted to specify also that call of the commissioners is still going to be included, even though in theory it could be considered non-essential. I considered the idea that we would, you know, that I would suggest we table call of the commissioners, but I think that when we're following Robert's rules as closely as we can, it definitely means that some things that you may want to discuss are inappropriate to discuss at various points throughout the entire agenda, perhaps, and therefore call of the commissioners is a chance for people to bring up things that they couldn't otherwise talk about. I just want to remind people that we are trying to be as concise as possible. I know I need to take that reminder to heart as well. That's obvious. And so just even in call of the commissioners, we'll try to keep things as brief and concise as we can and relevant to content that's timely and, you know, ideally either stuff for the immediate future or stuff that's being talked about in this meeting. Did anyone want to raise a hand about any of that so far? Yes, because I see him, Natalie, I'll go ahead and call on him if that's okay. Okay, so Dan, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Just for clarification, during the last board before you came on, we started a new agenda item called new business. And in those discussions, there was consensus that it was in the new business where items that commissioners want to discuss during the board meeting, they could. It's just that we couldn't take action on it. We could have a discussion during new business, but not take action on it. So I do believe that call the commissioners is more of a debrief, statement, whatever, but for discussions that are new, that aren't on the agenda, what we agreed is at the beginning of every meeting, the chair of the board or the meeting could simply say, is there any new business? Even if it's not on our agenda, we can add that if there's something somebody wants to discuss.
Yeah, so before I respond to that, I saw Debbie put her hand up. So Debbie, you have the floor. No? Okay, so yeah, Dan, thank you for telling me that, because I always appreciate being kept abreast of things that happened while I was not on the board that are relevant to what we're doing now. So I appreciate that. And that actually factors into something that kind of came up as a discussion point recently, which is, you know, whether or not we're allowed to add agenda items to the agenda at the meeting itself. And it's my understanding that we are not allowed to do that as it relates to any action being taken, but that yes, we can add items that we would just discuss. What I did not know until you just mentioned it is that it may be my role as president to, at the beginning, ask if anyone wants to add anything additional. So that's good to know. And we can either do that at the beginning, like you said, or once we get to new business, we can perhaps go through the items that were added to the agenda with proper notice first, because they were added with proper notice, and then perhaps that would be sort of an open area at the end for anyone to add anything before we move to call of the commissioners. I would say too that, call of the commissioners could certainly be a chance to mention something that you want to be on the agenda or plan to add to the agenda next month. It can be whatever you want. I just want to reiterate that keep it as brief as possible, keep it as relevant as possible. Dan, is that all okay as a response? Covered everything? Okay, thank you. So I think,
Martha,
yes,
can I make a request?
absolutely.
Can I ask that everybody turns off their video unless they're a commissioner? Because I'm looking for hands and there's a lot of screens.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that does simplify it visually, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to turn mine off too. Obviously, everybody else, Brian and Charles and Jerry, we can turn ours back on when we speak, but it helps me know where hands are.
Okay. Well, that raises an issue that I also wanted to be really explicit about, which is that in the event that we're all participating with video functionality, and we have not been clear at all whether that's an expectation, a guideline, we've just all defaulted to signing in with our computers or phones. Once there is a visual, that draws our visual attention. So if people are engaging in anything other than sitting there and listening, it's a distraction, and that's a problem. So, it was absolutely recommended by the IAPD webinar that I participated in that, you are actively engaged. That's part of simulating what you would be doing at the meeting. You wouldn't be making a sandwich at 908 Seward if we were all sitting at our table spots. So don't do it, on the camera. I will say though that if people for some reason choose to turn off their cameras, I don't see a problem with that. That's obviously a way to turn off that potential for distracting other people or to the public. I'm a little bit concerned that it could be used as a way to disengage. I'd like to see everybody stay on screen. That's my personal preference, because commissioner-wise at least, because it just establishes that yes, we're all present and accounted for. I will just say one other thing about that, which is that it was also recommended by the IAPD. I'm not totally clear whether this was part of Bill 2135 or whether this fell into the category of just general recommendations from them, but they said that we are supposed to establish at the beginning of the meeting that everyone can see and hear one another, and that if there are ever any interruptions to that are problematic, that people, say them immediately and we resolve them before conducting business again. And my understanding of that was that they don't want us to proceed with business and have a commissioner, because of technology, tuned out and unable to participate in that moment. And I think that's reasonable. I mean, I don't see any problem with that. Where it relates to whether people want to have their cameras on or not, I don't really know what to say about that. So does anyone have any thoughts or recommendations? Yeah, Dan.
There. Thank you, Martha. A couple of things come to mind. I appreciate you debriefing us on that. It sounded like a very valuable webinar, actually. I don't know if it was recorded and that's something we could watch ourselves, but that sounds very valuable. I, as a teacher, the last 25 years, I've been taught to differentiate my teaching because of the different personalities of students and the different ways that students learn. And I would just caution us to have a cookie cutter approach to how people listen and engage. We might have commissioners that like to jog during the meeting, and I think that's their business. And quite frankly, I think that's constitutionally protected for a Zoom. So I would ask us just to have a little bit of grace on what's comfortable for a commissioner. But if something that commissioner is doing that anyone else is being distracted by, I would ask us to have a conversation about it. Maybe we could learn from each other about what's driving that distraction. Maybe it's about the observer and not the commissioner. What I've found in students, I might have a group of 20 and 6 might be doing just like you said. They sit and they're looking very attentive, but 10 others might be bouncing off the walls or doing their ADD thing or sipping on water because of accommodations, whatever they need. So I just think of the real world of 21st century learning and listening. We have to have a little more grace on how people do that.
Yeah, so Debbie, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. If you can't sit at a meeting like you do at Ridgeville, then turn off your camera. You're not jogging. You're not an ADD student. You're a commissioner sitting at a meeting like you would at Ridgeville. And I feel like that's how it should be.
Okay. So, you know, I'm glad that you both spoke and I can kind of respond to both things at once. I absolutely recognize what Dan's talking about because of my, you know, I never worked as a teacher per se, but I was in college taking various classes about elementary math teaching and you know, took all kinds of classes that related to that. And absolutely, I mean, there are different kinds of learners. Some people are very, what's the word? Kinesthetic, where you're you learn by touch. There's auditory learners, there's visual learners. You know, sometimes people have literal impairments in one area and therefore they have to learn more in another. Without getting too off topic here, I definitely want to recognize that that is real, you know, and I do acknowledge that. However, that's sort of a general statement. When it comes to a more specific application of us as commissioners and sort of a standard of decorum, a standard of conduct, a standard of, you know, what active participation looks like in this context, you know, we're not second graders at a public school. We're adults who are elected officials, and there is sort of a more somewhat rigid standard for how we would conduct ourselves. And as I've already said, as much as possible, and everyone will interpret this however they interpret it, hopefully with not a huge wide, you know, range there. Conduct yourselves the way you would if you were at the physical meeting. And that would look like, as much as possible, sitting down, being in front of a screen, you know, visually representing that you are actively listening. I understand, though, of course, that just because you look like you're not listening, it doesn't mean that you aren't. And just because you might look like you are listening doesn't mean that you are. So, you know, it's not as cut and dry as we would like it to be. But we don't need to take crazy liberties with it either. So I absolutely see both comments as being valid, and thank you for those comments. I'm pretty sure that I said every single thing that I wanted to. I would ask that as we move forward, if there are any issues or questions or suddenly something regarding our, you know, sort of differing conduct regarding a stricter adherence to Robert's rules and how we do that virtually, et cetera. If there's ever any problem, please feel free to just speak if you need to. And it's better to be done in the moment than following up later because you didn't want to interrupt somebody, because as IAPD said, we need to make sure that in the moment we all can hear and see each other as much as possible. So that's it for that agenda item that I had moved to the top. Let's see. Yeah, that's everything for that. So then we're gonna go back to where we otherwise would have been, to the approval of the minutes from May 14th, 2020, and I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. I recognize Matt.
I'll second.
Okay, I did have one point I wanted to make sure I looked at before we go ahead and approve these minutes.
I'd like to make a correction while you're looking, if that's all right. The minutes, top of page 5, first full paragraph, the last sentence says the motion passed with a 3-2 vote. I believe that should read the motion passed with a 3-1 vote or a 3-1-1 vote with Mitchell abstaining.
Okay, so I actually think that this is a good point to consult with Charlie, because I know that there are multiple people who are confused by what the vote of present means relative to yes, no, or abstaining. And so, Charlie, are you able to come back on screen or just speak about that?
Can I explain my vote?
Well, I certainly you can explain it, Commissioner Mitchell, but
Okay.
there
Charlie,
is
do you want to
not,
go first, or do you want to hear from Matt first? I don't have a preference.
let me finish and then he may or may not want to go forward.
Okay.
There is not technically a vote of present, but he neither voted yes nor nay, so his vote is in effect an abstention. And I think that's the correction he's asking to be made to the minutes here.
Okay, and then Matt, did you want to say something additional?
Sure. I just, in Robert's rules, Article 8, Section 46 specifically says that one can vote present. I mean, I can read it. The
Can you
clerk calls
say
the roll.
that
Each
again,
member
Matt? Can you say where you're reading from again?
Robert's Rules of Order, Article 8, Section 46. The clerk calls the roll. It's on the section voting is the title. The clerk calls the roll, and each member, as his name is called, rises and answers yes or no or present if he does not wish to vote. And the clerk notes the answers in a separate column.
So that's correct. That's in Robert's Rules of Order. And it's always been my experience that under Illinois state law, although that's in Robert's Rules of Order, that was not a permissible vote, but it is in effect an abstention. It's neither a yay or a nay.
Okay, so as it relates to the recording in the minutes, it does sound like at a minimum, we need to correct that to be different than it's noted now, possibly to the effect of 3-1-1, because it's definitely not a yes, it's definitely not a no. I'm not quite sure at this point if there's any differentiation between present and abstaining. I'm not clear on that. I think we might need to look into that at a later time, because we don't need to take up too much time for that, because in terms of how it gets recorded in the minutes, which is the agenda item we're on right now, it's in either case going to be a 3-1-1. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yes, or 3-1 with Mitchell abstaining.
Okay. Perhaps, Julie, the best way to note it is 3-1 with Mitchell abstaining, so that it's just very clear that that was an abstention from him. It might not otherwise be clear what that additional one means. What I would just like clarity on as we move forward, and so Charlie, you can either offer this now or we can possibly talk about this later, is whether an abstention vote is actually at the discretion of a commissioner at any time, you know, at their will, or whether we are under some obligation to actually vote yes or no. It was presented to me by somebody who was on a different board, so they may be operating with different rules, that unless you have a financial conflict of interest, which you state as your reason for abstaining, that you are actually obligated to vote yes or no. So Charlie, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I've never heard anybody say that. You may have a moral obligation to vote on things. People may say that, but I don't think that you have a legal obligation to vote. If you feel for whatever reason that you need to abstain from a vote in your conscience, then you can abstain from a vote. And I don't think anybody should be able to question that. But if there's some state law I'm not aware of and somebody wants to show it to me, I'll look at it.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Like I said, I think we can look into that further at a later time. So I'll investigate further what the basis for that claim was that I'm aware of. I will say one thing, and then Dan, it'll be your turn after that. It's my personal stance that it is sort of understood to be one of our obligations as elected officials to make decisions. And I understand that sometimes the way that something goes to a vote isn't the way somebody might have wanted it to, or that they're not even ready to vote, or there are various reasons why you may not want to vote. I would just like to say, generally speaking, voting yes or no is preferred as far as I'm concerned, because I think that that's our job, to take a stand on issues and to be clear about how we feel one way or another once we've reached the point of voting on something. And I would also request, again, this isn't something I can enforce, if people feel like they need to abstain, it kind of seems like the kind of thing that maybe you would offer a bit of an explanation as to why you're abstaining, just so that the public understands how people voted and why. So that's just all I want to say. And Dan, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Just as part of our discussion on the minutes, I want to say, Julie, thank you. Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
I can hear someone else talking. I'm sorry. I just want to tell Julie, thank you for these minutes. Like every month, you're very thorough. I think they're extremely accurate, and just thanks for all that work that you put into it. That's all.
Okay. So I'm sorry. Can somebody remind me? Did we have a motion and a second to
Yes.
approve the minutes? Okay. So let's move to that roll call vote then, please, Julie.
Okay, Braun. Debbie Braun. Yes, no, yes. Okay. Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
and Mitchell.
Yes.
So to be clear, Commissioner Braun's vote was yes?
Yes, it was. Sorry.
Yeah, so to be clear, moving forward, if people are able to unmute themselves right before voting, I saw you nodding, Debbie, but just for ultimate clarity, I would say, unmute and speak as well. So moving on, approval of bills, and I'll ask then that Brian Rosinski have the floor to talk about the bills. Brian, are you there? Okay, so I just want to note that this is an example of somebody's screen who's been turned off, and we just don't know. You don't know when the screen's off if the person's there or not. And I currently don't know, what's happening. Oh, I saw a
He's
shift.
trying to turn it on.
What's that?
We're just having a technical issue. He's trying to turn it on.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hey, my fault. Here I am.
Hi, Brian.
Okay, so we're at the bills.
Yes.
Okay, so the actual bill total, I'm going to give you that first because it's a big one, $119,509.36. Of that bill total, $81,066.28 are refunds. Okay, so I'll go over the unusuals, but there's a bunch of names there. They're all refunds. Okay, so here we go. Art Encounter is the mural, which is just starting in progress for the garage shed or the shed in Ridgeville Park. Auto Wares, Ruben broke a taillight, so those are taillight parts. As we move down, City of Evanston, $6,000, the after-school program. As we move down farther, Dr. Patricia Effiams, the Equity Committee Board Staff Training, $2,650. Home Depot is $2,500. Those are storms for the Garage Art Studio that we planned for in the budget. Lemoy Ace Hardware is mostly COVID supplies, masks, sanitation, hand sanitizers, and a variety of soaps. Pinnell Andrews Construction is the concrete for the benches we installed, I believe 7 benches. Russo Power Equipment was mower parts. Seal Tight Exteriors is the garage roof, $8,400. And that's it for the unusuals. And again, the total, $119,509.36.
I just want to say I'm so sad to see my name on here for the refund for the camp that my daughter was supposed to do. It's just such a bummer, and yet I think it was the right call, and we had to do it. I'm pretty sure I saw Debbie's hand first.
I was just gonna make a motion that it be accepted. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, and then Matt, I saw.
Martha, you got to the point before me. I have a substantial refund coming because of kids camps in the amount of almost $2,000. And my question is for Charles is, I just want to make sure I publicly disclose that. 2, is it worth abstaining in the vote on?
So that's a question to Charles, to be
Yes.
clear? Okay, Charles, did you hear that? And to be clear, Matt, you're asking because it could be considered a payment made to you, even though it's a refund?
It is a payment made to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is a payment, but, you know, this would also affect you as well, Martha, correct?
Well, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. I mean, we're doing the refunds for everybody, but you do have a personal interest in it. You know, I think technically you probably shouldn't vote on it. I don't know. Jerry, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, Jerry.
My thought would be that when we publish the report of disbursements at year end, refunds are not typically a part of that report, so they aren't viewed as a disbursement. You know, it's a reversal of revenue, basically. So my concern would be is if, you know, we have another commissioner here who had kids enrolled in the camps, you wouldn't be able to have a vote on approving the bills because you're all getting refunds from the camps. So I think it could handicap us to have everybody abstain, and I don't think it's truly viewed as a disbursement. That's my opinion.
You know, I think if you think about it, the decision was made not to have the camps for a reason having nothing to do with anything personal to anyone. It was made district-wide for everybody, and the decision was made, everybody gets their money back. I don't think it's appropriate to deal with the commissioners differently than any other citizens. I can understand where you may not want to vote on it, if that's what your thinking is, but it seems to me that even if you didn't vote on it, and you made a claim against the Park District, I don't see how the Park District could say they're going to refund everybody else's money, but not yours. So I think the decision was already made, and now it's just, you know, going through with the mechanics of it.
Sure, I agree. Most importantly, I just wanted to be straightforward, publicly disclose it. Also, with me and Martha abstaining, I think we'd still get 3 votes to pass this approval of bills.
Right. I mean, I don't really know the technical, you know, guidelines here or rules that may or may not allow for a differentiation between a payment made for services or goods versus a refund for, you know, programs that never took place, couldn't take place because of this, you know, unprecedented pandemic. You know, it just feels inherently different than a payment for goods or services, which would obviously lead to perhaps a financial conflict of interest. But I mean, perhaps just to be on the safe side, we could abstain, Matt, because the vote would pass. We don't have anybody else whose kids are, no. So, Matt, do you feel like you have a recommendation of I've heard from Charlie, of course, but you know, if you were to
Sure.
abstain, I feel like I
abstain
should as well.
Yeah, I'd abstain to be cautious and to highlight the conflict.
Okay, Jerry, you have the floor.
Pretty clear, I think.
Again, just from an accounting standpoint, there is not an appropriations line item that these disbursements go towards. It is a reduction of a revenue line item, not an appropriations line item.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like there's some consensus, but some caution at the same time. So I would say that we should move to a roll call vote, and anyone who chooses to abstain can do so. You know, I don't see a need to, but it's not really up to me. So I think we should move to the vote. Julie?
Was there a second for this
I'll
motion?
second. I'll second.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought we had a second.
Ron,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
Mitchell.
I would vote present and abstain because of my financial conflict of interest.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to petty cash, so we can hear from Brian again now.
Hey, just so you know, we asked Martha Gaines to increase petty cash to $4,000 after last board meeting, several days into the month. And she gave us that permission. That's why it's over $1,500. And later on in the budget, you'll see, or later on in the agenda, you'll see a line item for increasing petty cash. So I'll go down some of the unusuals. Amazon, $698 is mostly camp supplies that are going out to our virtual camps. And there were some rodent needs in terms of traps and bait. Discount school supply is camp supplies also. Evanston Organics, many trips to pick up loads of wood chips for the playgrounds. We're doing more of that from here out through the end of June. Intuit, we had to order checks and envelopes. Johnny's Seeds, a variety of seeds for the garden program. MailChimp, emails over 2,000. SNS Worldwide, more camp supplies. Smart Sign, basically parking signs and at the Ridgeville parking lot at 908 Seward. Walmart, building supplies, and Zoom for the webinar and conference that we are involved in now. That's it.
I'll entertain a motion to approve petty cash for June in the amount of $3,130.81. Pat? Thank you. And a second? Debbie? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. So we'll go to the roll call vote.
Yeah. Ron,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to monthly reports, and we'll go to Brian first.
Okay, crazy month, but in your monthly packet is a tentative budget for you to review. As you know, there are many questions surrounding program safety with COVID-19 among us. This budget makes assumptions that we will make progress against the virus and our programs and services will take place in some form, hopefully close to normal. Obviously, we will work and plan under state guidelines as well as the Illinois Department of Health. We therefore can only spend and provide for what you appropriate. In my opinion, it's better to be able to provide programs than to be left short if health issues subside. You will see a 2.4% increase in the tentative budget. Treasurer Gibbs will also explain Ridgeville's financial position later on and help us through the revenue side of the 2021 budget. In short, Ridgeville is sitting in a good financial position. We will need to pass a tentative budget in July and then an appropriation ordinance in September and a tax levy in December. Before COVID-19, we were on par to have this one of the most successful program years ever at Ridgeville, if not the most successful. Well, that's really impressive, and kudos to Natalie. Natalie and Jessica have been working extremely hard to get virtual programs and refunds done this month. You already saw the refunds. They were enormous. I'm extremely proud of their efforts to get year-ending projects and expenditures completed in this budget year. Natalie will update you on the state of summer programs. We asked for and received an increase in the petty cash, which I already told you about, and we are going to ask for an increase in petty cash for July and August of $6,000. The free lunch program will be extended through August 17th. It has been especially useful at Cayman Fieldhouse every Monday. We have served over 4,000 meals every Monday. As you know, they go out in bags of 10. As I mentioned before, this program is successful because of the combined efforts of District 202, District 65, and the City of Evanston. And finally, we are happy to announce Wesley Shavers, who you've already met, a Ridgeville resident and employee who will do his internship. Wes is a Valparaiso student, earning his communications degree. He has been a camper or employee at Ridgeville since he was in the 4th grade. Congratulations to Wesley, and we are very proud of him. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. That's such a nice, happy note to end on there. Any questions or comments from anybody? Okay. Moving on then to Jerry's report.
Thank you. Apologies in advance. I have a rather long report with a substantial amount of information tonight. It's just the lucky timing of partly the time of year we're in and partly the circumstances we're in. I'll start with notable activity. On June 9th, the Cook County Clerk notified me that the preliminary agency tax rates for the 2019 tax year are available for review, with a deadline of June 10th at 5 p.m. for submitting any corrections. On June 9th, I reviewed the tax rate report and I confirmed the levy information was correctly applied by the clerk. The report shows the levy ordinance request was reduced by the requirements of PTEL, the Property Tax Extension Limit Law, by $6,542. So what I'm saying is that the levy ordinance we passed got reduced by the state law. The clerk applied this reduction proportionally across all funds in accordance with the default practice. We have the right to override that by providing them a different set of figures by fund as long as it brings the total to the required reduced amount. We typically don't change it, and I did not in this case because the amounts really overall at about 1% aren't that significant. The clerk has also highlighted the fact that in May 20th, 2020, county ordinance was passed in response to COVID-19, waiving late fees for 2 months this fall. The suggestion is that the district may experience delayed receipt of tax revenues as taxpayers are experiencing financial hardships during the pandemic. Moving on to some special reports related to the notable activity. The first report is the Cook County Agency Tax Report. Right now, it's not a public report, but soon that will be released to the public. It shows the computational process going from the levy ordinance passed in December by you to the tax rates to be supplied to the Cook County Treasurer that will go on the tax bills to be issued in a month or so. As noted earlier, the clerk reduced the levy amount by $6,542. Offsetting that, however, remember they add 3% to the requested amount to provide for the loss allowance in the collection of taxes. People may appeal their assessed values as one example, and that would be a reason why we could lose some of the tax money we're hoping for. Over time, actual losses might exceed the 3%, or they might fall below this figure. Bottom line, there's a degree of imprecision and uncertainty as a part of this process. As in prior years, our financial planning has to include flexibility to adapt to the results of that imprecision and uncertainty. There's a second set of special reports that has charts illustrating selected information from our annual financial reports for the years 2004 through 2019. Before beginning the discussion of those, and after writing my report, I realized I probably should have emphasized a few key points, and I'll state those now. Number one, nothing in the charts is intended to suggest that the district has been poorly managing its finances. The exact opposite is true. For a number of years, commissioners have established and supported policies to responsibly and prudently husband the taxpayers' dollars, and Brian, as director of the district, has faithfully managed the monies in line with those prudent policies. Two, at present, the district is in very sound financial condition. Its rainy day funds were created exactly for times like those we are now in with the pandemic. The district has no debt and operates very frugally. There are very few government units throughout the state of Illinois that come close to matching the economy of our districts. And even rarer are those without debt. The district is in very sound condition to weather the pandemic. Three, in the past, the district had debt and teetered near the edge of financial insolvency. It was through the efforts of the commissioners and Brian that it has faithfully followed a long, steady path to reach the enviable financial position it has today. Two things are now true that are the reason for the study in the charts that I prepared for the meeting tonight. One, there is always room for improvement, no matter how good you've been performing. And two, in these extraordinary times, it's an opportunity to examine how things have been going and determine how they might go better. That's what's behind the study of these charts, and they in fact illustrate there are some areas where the district can improve its handling of the taxpayer monies to build even further on its already stellar financial performance. So with that said, in the context of the budget planning season and the uniqueness of the COVID-19 impact on business as usual processes and the cumulative impact of some long-term trends, it's timely for such a study that's presented in these charts to appropriately balance the competing pressures of these various factors. So I'm going to start with the first chart, which is entitled the RPD fund balances for fiscal years ending 2004 to 2018 in 5-year averages, and a column for 2019 actual and a 2020 projection. And throughout all of these charts, take the 2020 projection with a huge grain of salt, because there are big numbers in play and a lot of assumptions and a lot of moving parts and variables. It's just an effort at this as of May 30th financials to project how we'll end up in the year. There will likely be big swings in those numbers, but I included them anyway, but don't put a lot of weight on 2020. Everything else is actual data, and that is very reliable. So the chart shows the growth of the major fund balances over time. You'll notice back in the 2004 to 2008 period, we averaged under $200,000 in the major funds. And that's the key word here. These are the major funds: Recreation Fund, General Fund, and Capital Projects. It does not include the minor funds of Social Security, IMRF, liability insurance. It does not include the Working Cash Fund, which is a non-spendable fund. It's really what are the funds that we use to run the district on a daily basis. Today we've gone from under 200,000 in those balances in those funds to something approximating somewhere around $700,000 to $800,000, depending on whether you look at 2019 or what might be our 2020 outcome. The rate of growth, in between the two funds, in particular, it's the Recreation Fund that has really increased its balances. It's a much more modest growth in the General Fund. The rate of growth is the line on the chart, and the rate of growth has been falling. So the forces that were in play that created the buildup in balances has been diminishing over time, is what that's telling us. Now, Since the appropriations ordinance each year is balanced to exactly match the levy ordinance, so our planned expenditures equal our revenues, you might be asking yourselves, why would fund balances change at all? And there's a multi-part answer to that, at least 3 parts I can think of. One, our spending regularly comes in below our plan. And that's partly the way that the process works. It's hard to get our spending down to the exact penny, and we're restricted by law from spending more than our plan. So we always have a little bit of money that we're turning back each year because Brian runs the day-to-day operations of the district so well. However, it's our spending comes pretty close, but it's actually our revenues, even though sometimes they come in a little low, our revenues have been really coming in strong above our plan. So that's going to add to our fund balances. And then there's the issue of the 3% tax loss provision. If we've had a string of years where our tax losses have been less than the 3% that gets added in by the statute allowing for that, that's going to yield more trickling into our little bucket of rainy day money. And then finally, that goes the other direction, is the PTEL reductions. We try to plan our budget very carefully so we don't see big reductions, but we do occasionally have reductions like we did this year. And the reason we try to maximize it and err on the side of hitting a reduction is because we don't want to leave money on the table for our baseline operations, which is a better approach than underestimating PTEL and never having it cut. But the cumulative effect of these factors over time is why these balances have been growing rather consistently over time. If that increase is part of a comprehensive strategic plan, we really don't have a concern. But unplanned, ongoing increases can start to create problems for us and may require us to have some adjustments to our budget planning process. More on that thought in a bit. The second chart I'm going to take you to is the revenues by major fund. So RPD revenues by fund. And it charts out those same groupings and time periods. Here again, recreation revenues have increased significantly more than general revenues. The rate of growth is more stable. And note that the rate of growth doesn't include our capital fund, because our capital fund is not funded by tax dollars. It's funded by transfers mostly, occasionally a few other things such as a grant or a bequest might fund it, but the focus here is really on the tax impact of things. So that fund was left out of the rate of growth calculation. The recreation fund has the benefit of program revenue as well as tax revenue, whereas the general fund is nearly 100% funded by tax revenue, and PTEL imposes a governor on the growth rate of tax revenue, particularly in the general fund. So the increased program revenue between 2004 and now is most likely the result of the calculated endeavor to expand programming and generate non-tax revenues over time. And I think it's fair to say, we have more program activity going on today than we did back in the days of 2004. The third chart shows the change in our appropriations by major fund over time. Appropriately, given the revenue growth, the change is greatest in the recreation fund. Increased recreational expenditures would be consistent with expanded programming. The rates of change are not relatable to the revenue change rates because in this case, they do include the capital project appropriations. But any gap between the amount raised in revenue each year and the amount expended results in a fund balance change that should be planned for in expenditures, that should be a planned for expenditure in a future appropriations ordinance. So what I'm saying there is when we turn money back, part of our budget planning process for the next year should be how are we intentionally deploying that excess that we gained? Are we purposely wanting to add to our fund balance, Is there a project we want to accomplish with it? Is there debt that we want to retire? But it shouldn't just be an ignored accidental thing. It should be more deliberately accounted for in our budgeting process. The fourth chart gets into a topic we don't talk about as often as perhaps we should, and that is our capital assets. Those of you that were on the board when I first joined as the treasurer know that in one of the earliest meetings I participated in, I lobbied, or I made the point that it would be nice if we had a 5-year strategic capital plan, like I see many condominium associations. I use the example of my real estate background. You see a lot of condominium associations have that, but and from time to time we've made efforts to have that, but in fact we operate with a shorter time horizon than I think is comfortable. And the capital assets is maybe showing this is an area for improvement for us. The information in this chart comes from the annual report. It's usually in the notes. And what it's showing is that our capital expenditures each year, well, it's a fact, our capital expenditures each year add to our capital assets. And then the depreciation reduces those capital assets. The chart is showing the net capital assets, additions less depreciation. And generally our story here is that over time, the district has been depleting our capital assets faster than we've been investing in improvements. 2019 kind of bucked a longer term trend, but the 2020 estimates suggest we're reverting back to the longer term trend of decline. You know, the question to fairly ask here is, with our fund balances increasing and our revenue and appropriations being carefully managed for prudent, modest growth, why isn't more being done to invest in our capital assets? What's our long-range plan for capital improvements, and how does that correspond to this chart for that plan? The last chart is another way of looking at the financial picture that asks, our fund balances, how sufficient are they? It divides our fund balances by the monthly level of expenditure to yield the number of months the fund balance could support those expenditures. And going back to the 2004-2008 timeframe, we averaged about 4.5 months of balances. And actually at the beginning of that time frame, which is not shown in the chart because it's a 5-year grouping instead of an individual year grouping, the supply was only 3.4 months overall, with only 2 months in the recreation fund. And we've been steadily increasing that supply over time, such that in 2019, our overall level of reserve is about 11 months of supply. The recreation fund has a little more than a year, and over time, the recreation fund has gone from having the weakest position to having the strongest position. This aspect of the chart study begs several questions that the Civic Federation has studied in the past. In 2009, they published a document. The Civic Federation is, in their terms, a nonpartisan government research organization working to maximize the quality and cost effectiveness of government services in the Chicago region and the state of Illinois. And they asked, how much fund balance is too much and not enough and just right? And the article had a number of quotes that I'm selectively utilizing here to comment. I've added, in addition to their quotes, some own comments of mine that are in bracketed italics. But those key quotes are: 1, all governments, whether states, cities, or school districts, and they could have said park districts, should place a portion of their general operating revenues in a general fund reserve or rainy day fund, which in fact we've been doing. Governments that maintain reserves are better positioned to deal with funding issues in bad times. And this is why the district is very well positioned to cope with the funding challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. Putting money into reserves is a more fiscally prudent action than spending surpluses on new or expanded programs. And this is a point we've often discussed, that better to invest in a capital project, put it in fund balance, do something that's a one-off thing, than to try and fund the district on a regular operating basis through just surplus monies. In general, we've been very prudent in this regard and consistent with the recommendations in the civic.
Hey, Jerry.
Yeah.
Jerry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Where are you at this point? Did you go back from graphs to reading a certain portion?
I've been continuing through my written report.
Uh-huh.
I'm on the section that's indented on page 2 of the report, reading the quotes. We're done. Well, we're still kind of under the consideration of the months of supply chart. I'm going to the paragraph that starts: the National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting, NACSLB, and the Government Finance Officers Association recommend that all governments develop a formal written fund balance policy that is made publicly available. I'm not aware that we have such a written policy, and it would probably be prudent that we develop such a policy. They asked the question, how big should our reserves be? While it's a good idea to have a general fund, to have general fund reserves that can be used for contingencies, how big should the reserve be? And their conclusion is it's a contentious issue to which there is no one-size-fits-all answer. The best practices for general fund reserves, the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, recently updated its best practice on unreserved general fund balances to recommend that general purpose governments, and we're not a general purpose government, we're a special purpose government, but the general purpose governments should maintain at minimum an unrestricted general fund balance of no less than 2 months of regular general fund operating revenues or expenditures. The GFOA cautions some governments may require much larger reserves based on their particular financial situation. So 2 months is a minimum, but it's not unreasonable to require a bunch more than that. The Civic Federation strongly supports local governments adopting a formal fund balance policy and maintaining general operating fund reserves to at least the GFOA minimum recommended level, 2 months. We support the reasonable use of reserves to prevent severe service cuts, tax hikes, or to address unforeseen contingency situations. However, we do caution against governments holding excessive reserves, which we have defined as being a ratio of unreserved general and special revenue balances to operating expenditures for those funds higher than 50%, which is another way of saying 6 months. In our view, if a government has a fund balance ratio higher than 50% for 6 months, it should consider shifting towards longer term asset holdings, retiring debt, or adjusting the income streams feeding the funds to bring income in line with current spending requirements. That last point is particularly key. Basically, it argues that balances bigger than 6 months of supply should be shifted towards capital assets. The district has no debt to retire. Program fees or taxes could be reduced, but that path has negative consequences for being able to support the ongoing daily operations of the district in future years. The capital asset option is consistent with correcting the long-term underfunding of the capital assets of the district. In summary, the study and charts of the long-term financial trends suggest that the prudent management of the district has been wise overall. Yet imbalances and issues are developing that should be addressed in this and upcoming budgets. Capital assets need a strategic long-term plan to prudently redeploy excess fund balances through a deliberative improvement program. The annual budgeting process should be adjusted to incorporate the capital asset plan and to adjust revenue and expenditures to compensate for any addition to fund balances in the just ended fiscal year whenever fund balances are above a 6 month supply. When balances are lean, this addition to fund balances is welcome. Once the rainy day fund is topped off, they are unwelcome in the absence of any capital projects or debt retirement options. And finally, these activities should be performed under the umbrella of an overarching fund balance policy if it doesn't already exist. So I know I threw a lot of information at you there, but that's the study and charts. And there'll be more of that discussion as we get into the budgeting process this year. The remainder of my report is the typical monthly financial reports. The statement of revenue and appropriation disbursements shows that as of the end of May, even with the cancellation of the spring programs and the related refunds approved in May, the district has brought in $232,000 more in revenue than it has expended. The question is this because revenue is high, expenditures are low, or some combination of the two? And the answer is the taxes are a bit under plan and program revenue is 10,000 over, but overall revenue is about 15,000 below plan. It's the expenditures that are far below plan. And that might sound good, but it is in fact an unwelcome position for the district to be in. To the extent that this results in increased months supply of balances at fiscal year end that is not adjusted for in our next fiscal year budget, it exposes the district to legal action from taxpayer advocacy groups. And adjusting it for the next fiscal budget potentially has longer-term negative consequences to our base level of taxes that we rely on for daily operations due to the way the PTEL process works. So the low level of expenditure, if it's isolated to just the recreation fund and is no more than the loss of program revenue, then the tax and revenue and fund balance impact would be neutral. However, it appears that as of May 31st, that is not the case. Brian and I have met on several occasions as a part of the budget planning process and discussed the objective of striving to fully expend this year's approved appropriation amounts of the fiscal plan prior to June 30th. Brian is working hard to adjust and adapt as best as possible to achieve this. The appropriations ledger shows the same details, but by categories behind the appropriations totals on the statement of revenue appropriations. I've said enough about that in the preceding discussion. I provide the balance sheet and GL trial balance without any particular highlights. The outstanding items report is generally up to date, but it is growing in terms of the number of entries due to refund checks that are not getting cashed by month's end. And this is likely to be a growing and challenging issue for us in the next several months because of the refunds for COVID-19 impacts. And then finally on the outstanding items, I've been deferring the last couple months taking action on some items, but because we're coming to fiscal year end, I need action on these items to clean up the books for closing out the year. And so I've got a recommended motion that the board move to approve the write-off of the following transactions. A, by charging to utilities CA5 $135.54 paid to Comcast in the May 2020 general bills. B, by charging to utilities CA5 $135.67 paid to Comcast as an unapproved expenditure through the general corporate account in May 2020. C, by charging to Office Administration CA6 $52.92 paid to ADP for the payment of unidentified payroll taxes as an unapproved expenditure to the general corporate account in April 2020. D, by charging to utilities CA5 $775 paid to Commonwealth Edison as an unapproved expenditure through the general corporate account in April 2020. E, by charging to utilities CA5 $776 paid to Commonwealth Edison in the April 2020 general bills. F, by charging to the utilities CA5 $61.77 paid as a check number 104502 in the November 2019 general bills. And G, by charging to utilities CA5 $8.74 paid to the city of Evanston in the December 2019 general bills.
This is Coyne. So moved.
Second.
Let me go on to discussion of the rationale behind those moves. Items A and B are due to an error in posting in the invoice to the general bills report. Item C is an unknown ADP charge for payment of the employee portion of payroll taxes. The office staff has been unsuccessful in resolving it through discussions with ADP. Items D and E are due to discrepancies between the amount shown by Commonwealth Edison on their bill and the amount they actually charged us. Item F is due to a lost reissued payment to Verizon. And item G is due to a posting error in the general bills in December by which an invoice was posted individually and paid to a subsequent invoice. And here I'll look for your second and a vote.
Second.
Okay,
Sorry,
Commissioner.
unmute. So roll call vote now, please.
Yep. Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
and Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay. With this motion, the outstandings report will be brought current except for 2 uncashed payroll checks by employee Dreller. Office staff is working to make contact with the employee and resolve the issue. The final report is the reconcilement between the bank accounts and the fund balances. Balances in excess of FDIC limits are being held at Chase. However, in accordance with state law and district investment policy, Chase is holding collateral at the New York Federal Reserve in the amount of that excess. Overall, like the fund balances, the cash balances of the district are comfortably adequate to manage through the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on programs of the district. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. As always, it's super thorough, and I appreciate that. I don't feel completely clear on what any specific recommendations are. Do you feel like you have any quick clarification in that regard as to just a final point of specific actions that you would recommend we take?
I would refer you to the summary of the discussion of the charts. So the very last paragraph of page 2 of my report, so the specific recommendation, I think we need an overarching fund balance policy. We need a long-range strategic plan for capital improvements. And as we move into this budget year's planning, we can address some of these slowly developing issues.
Okay.
Some
and
of
I
it will
guess,
naturally just resolve itself as we talk budget stuff.
yeah, I was just going to say that it sounds like the next point of discussion for those things would happen as part of a budgeting process. So I'm sure you would plan to, Jerry, but if I can just specifically request that you draw our attention when we're talking about budget to all things that you've already specified here as to, you know, the actual connections at that point in time. That would be great. And thanks again, Jerry. Anyone have any questions, issues? No. Okay. Moving on to Pat. Yes.
I guess I would ask Brian, and part of the budget process is that if he would highlight 5 or 6 or how many ever capital improvements that he would recommend. Maybe that's in this budget that he's just prepared, but if it's not, I think we should have something to that effect in there. You know, what are the items that need to be addressed? Do we need a new play set? Do we need a new parking lot at the 908 sewer? Do we need, you know, basketball courts redone? I mean, so if we could get into the detail on those items and have some direction from Brian, I think that would be helpful.
I have, when we get to the budget, I will highlight the large expenditure items that are in the budget. And then by next month, I'll have recommendation on more, which you can decide on how much to spend in capital improvements or unexpended funds. For instance, we need a parking lot. I mean, that's obvious. But by next month, I'll have that list for you. And when we get to the budget, I'll highlight all the large items that are in the budget this year. Some Pat's already mentioned.
Can I ask one more question of Jerry too? Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Martha, can I ask, Jerry, does the CBDG money that we received over a period of time, how does that impact the figures that you did? Or does that factor in any way, or?
Well, because most of the time when we've brought in we brought CDBG money into our funds two ways. Sometimes we brought it into the recreation fund and expended it from there. Other times we brought it into the capital fund and expended it from that fund. But we've always spent what we've received, so it hasn't inflated or raised our fund balances over time in a negative way. But what it has done is it has increased our, to the extent they've been spent on capital programs, they've increased our capital assets. So for example, when we bring in a CDBG fund and renovate Brummel Park, the money came in, the money went out, but our capital assets went up by the amount of the improvements at Brummel Park. And then over time, that gets depreciated and the capital assets deplete as depreciation occurs over time.
Okay, so it does factor into your grasp, basically.
Yes.
Just a question, about how many hours did it take to prepare that? I mean, that information seems to be very useful and very helpful for us. So about how long did it take to put that together?
Well, I had in my files inherited from Dean annual reports going back to 2004. The actual collecting of the data out of the annual reports probably took less than an hour. Okay. I'm no pro at generating charts in Excel. And actually I did an earlier set of charts that was incredibly more detailed, and I decided that would be unbelievably overwhelming to you. So it took me a while to get it down to something that was the level of overwhelming that it already is. And I would say, something I puttered around with in the evenings over a several-day period. So it was a couple days of work, I would say.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I think it's going to be great.
It was long overdue. I think we needed to see it. And, I've had a sense for a long time capital assets was an issue. And I've long recognized that our increasing fund balances eventually would become a point of discussion. And because it's great that they're increasing, we needed to from a low base. But as we, what's our target and have we hit it? And if so, now what? We're kind of at the point where it was just appropriate to ask those kind of questions. Yeah. And so it's something I had decided, I almost had the balances discussion with you last fall, but we were in the middle of the audit, and I decided it would be most appropriate just right around budget time because it was most relevant during budget season. So I wanted to do this like back in March and April, but then the meetings weren't normal. So, but I couldn't let it pass this budget season without discussion.
Charlie?
Yeah, I think that Commissioner Coyne has dropped off the call. And I think we should note that for purposes of the minutes at this point. And it was some time, I guess, during Jerry's presentation on the budget.
Okay, got it.
Why do you think that, Charlie?
Because if you're there, I'm sorry, I don't see you.
No, I've been here the whole time.
I apologize. You disappeared from my screen, so I thought you weren't there. But if you're there, I stand corrected, and I'm sorry.
Okay, so just to be clear again, is this an issue of a camera being turned off by choice, or an issue of technology failing us? And I just want to highlight that because if somebody's screen goes black, we literally don't necessarily know whether they chose to turn their camera off or if there's a technology issue. And not only do we need to be concerned that we can see people, but we need to be concerned that they're able to hear. So that's why I feel that keeping video on for commissioners is ideal. It just makes it very clear to everybody that that person is still tuned in. So Dan, just for clarity, did you turn your camera off, or was that an unintentional video interruption?
I have every constitutional right in my home to turn my camera off during a Zoom meeting. I understand your protocol, but it is totally legal to turn your Zoom camera off during our meeting. and we don't have a protocol to better communicate with each other when that happens. But at times, I think we're human beings and we need to excuse ourselves, but we can still be on the Zoom meeting by listening.
Right, and that's actually not answering the question that I asked you. I asked you if you intentionally turned your camera off.
Yes, I did.
Okay, and just to be clear, you know, you're right. We don't have anything established at this point in time that would require people's cameras to be on. And I was explicit, I'll be explicit again, that I think it's a recommended practice. The cameras are on whenever possible. Absolutely, if you have to turn it off, you turn it off. You know, this is already sort of an invasion of privacy inherently, that everybody's looking at everybody's, you know, home environments. But I do think that it helps everyone function the best, as evidenced by the fact that Charlie had concern that you weren't, you know, actively in the meeting, not to criticize you, but literally just to establish whether you are or are not, you know, able to be listening at that point in time. So
there's also a point of just educating each other. I don't know how many Zoom meetings our members of the board have been on. I've been over 100 during this COVID. And it's pretty standard practice for people to turn their cameras off for various reasons. But as long as their image is still showing up in the Zoom screen, then they are listening.
Okay, so I think we've established that it does work best if people can see that commissioners are still present, and so we'll move on. We were, Charlie had mentioned that, and we were otherwise in the process, I think, of still talking to Jerry. Were we not? Pat McCourt, were you still in the process of talking?
No, I'm done. I think just to thank Jerry for his effort, and I think those charts and that information is going to be very useful for us.
Okay. I also just want to perhaps echo what's already been said, which is that it seems like moving forward, it would be beneficial for us to consider our financial position, not just from year to year to year in terms of a yearly budget, but considering more of a long-term strategy, 5 years, whatever, maybe even 10 years, and just being mindful of what we might be able to do with funds that exist beyond just our yearly budget. And so I'm excited to see us, you know, transition to a more complete, you know, accounting process therein. So I think that we will move on unless there's any additional questions or issues from anyone for Jerry's report. And so, yes, I think we had, we're moving on to Natalie's report.
Hi, okay. All right, so the Ridgeville Readers Book Club in June, we're celebrating LGBTQ Pride by reading Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rifka Brunt. The Ridgeville Readers Book Club will discuss on June 28th at 3 p.m. through Zoom. Everyone's welcome to join. Information is on the website. Our Youth Grow Team. The Youth Grow Team, supervised by Catherine Egan, began this past Monday. We have 7 youth employees, which are funded through a partnership with the City of Evanston, who are beginning to work at Elks Park to plant produce for Edible Evanston Food Pantry. They're also maintaining the perimeter of the garden, planting pollinator plants and clearing the walk paths between beds, managing compost and rain barrels. They will help us also with planting pollinator plants throughout the park districts this summer. Virtual camps began on Monday as well. We are offering free virtual camps through Zoom webinar June 8th through July 3rd. They're Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Our camp directors, V. Witter, Laura Downey, J.C. Herman, Wes Shavers, and Alicia Mayan, they're each leading 4 sessions on a weekly theme. We've got about 40 kids registered for this right now, which is super cool. It's been quite a learning curve. We've learned a lot about technology on this little adventure. But I purchased a ton of camp supplies to make free activity packs that are made available to any family who needs them. They include a variety of papers, scissors, glue sticks, markers, crayons, so on and so forth. The virtual camps are also free and the activity camps are free as well. We're encouraging families to share photos of their kids' creations with us so that we can share them on social media. And we'll be encouraging kids to bring some artwork to us that we can decorate the windows of the community house with and the display boards at our parks so that folks can enjoy them as they're walking by. As for July through August, we are still considering our options for that time. Our hands are pretty tied until we move into phase 4, and we just don't really know when that's going to be. Mini camps have been mostly canceled. The ones that are still kind of TBD are the ones that are being offered in August. So those are on hold, but just about everything else has been canceled by the partner organizations that we're going to offer them. Our farmers market is pre-order only at this point. So Lyons Fruit Farm has created their own online registration option. So people can pre-order through their website and request delivery, and they're coming down on Wednesdays to deliver produce to people's homes. This is what we're gonna roll with until phase 4 when we can get them out into the park. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that happens by July. Shakespeare and concerts. Concerts on the Ridge is postponed until at least July 22nd. I currently have 4 bands scheduled to perform. I've been looking for a few more that would take us through August around the beginning of school time. The goal is to have concerts as soon as we are safely into phase 4 of the reopening plan. And I look forward to moving forward with those. Mudlark Theater is aiming to launch their production of As You Like It the weekend of August 7th through the 9th. If we are safely in phase 4, again, of the reopening plan, I will keep you posted on that. And the Arc Theater has officially postponed their production of Julius Caesar until the summer of 2021. The Ridgeville mural. So Evanston Art Encounter will begin work on a mural at Ridgeville Park on the side of the shed that faces South Boulevard. They are rendering some designs, inspired some conversations that Martha and I had with them. They're going to get those to us soon so we can take a peek at them, but they're going to focus on nature, specifically wildflowers, and a diverse group of children in our community. And then additionally, we plan to paint the 6 wooden benches at Ridgeville Park in complementary colors to the mural and add some small artistic designs that highlight our annual programming. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie. Any questions from anybody? All right. So now we will move on to the update or monthly report, rather, from the READY Committee. Dr. Effiam, there you are.
Here I am. How are you all tonight?
We're good. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I won't be before you long, but let me run through really quickly where we're at and where I hope we'll be. So to date, in terms of the training, can you all see the screen?
We can see you. Are you trying to show your screen?
Yep, hang on 1 second. I have to go back and share it. Give me a second, technology. Can you see it now?
No, still see you.
All right, let me give you one more try and then we'll just go without it. Natalie, I need you to you need to give me screen sharing.
Are you, I don't know if I see something different than you, Pat, but at the very bottom of the screen where you would maybe go to participants and chat, if you have to hover there to make it go available,
Yeah.
if you do that, do you see share screen as an option?
Yes, I have that. It says that Natalie has to disable that for me on her end.
Okay.
Yep.
I have.
Okay. Well,
I'm allowing all participants to share their screen.
Okay. Well, it may not be then, and I apologize.
I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
All right. I think you're set now.
There we go. All right. Can you see me now? All right, let's just let's go ahead and move forward. I don't want to hang you up on technology all night. So in terms of training, the board of directors and the READY committee, which is the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, have both completed 2 hours of training. Those are the first 2 hours where we're beginning to what we call normalize the conversation around race. And we went through the first one, a set of equity definitions that the district will be functioning by. We also have those ready and prepared to go up on the website. And then we also went through an implicit bias and privilege session. And we have the board that's meeting groups of 2 while the READY committee is meeting as a whole. I have to say I've been extremely pleased. I had some hesitation about breaking the board up into so many small groups, but I think that that's been very helpful to get us going at least, and it certainly has not been, in my opinion, anything but a success. The READY group as well, they meet as a whole because they don't have the problem with the Open Meetings Act, and that's been really well. And so the board members are meeting bi-weekly, so they're scheduled to complete their training in mid-July. The READY committee meets weekly, so they'll finish theirs in the first week of July. But the big question that lingers here is, ideally it would be good to be able to complete the last 2 to 3 hours of training together collectively. And that would mean you'd have to set up special meetings because of the Open Meetings Act. And so I'll present that question at the end of my presentation. The upcoming sessions that I am proposing that we condense meet with and discuss as a whole body is confronting unconscious bias. What does it mean to be an ally? Courageous conversations. And finally, our final session is what, so what, and now what? So where do we go from here is we have a couple of things going on is that I am wrapping up my community assessment report. And I fully expect that I would be able to release that to the READY committee and to the board on July 3rd, which is just a couple of weeks before your July 11th board meeting. And July 11th, I would formally present that report to the board. And then at some point, the board would need to move to formally organize the READY committee, accept their charter, their mission, and give them their charge. And then finally, the board and the READY committee would convene to review recommendations of the report and to determine where you all want to go from here. So as I said, the 2 questions that I have is, we are moving now. Let's see if I can get back to you. The whole goal was to get us through this normalization phase, which we have gotten through, or we are getting through with the current training that we have. The next step for us is organization, and that comes following my final report, you all accepting the recommendations and determining where you want to go from there. Any questions? So how can you tell me as individually or collectively, how do you all, are you comfortable, do you think, having been in these 2 1-hour sessions with just 2 people, do you think we're ready to move to a larger group of 6, the full board? Are you comfortable with that?
I am.
Okay. All right. It sounds good. Thank you. So any other questions? You're muted, Martha.
Sorry. Pat, you and I had talked about getting ourselves sort of caught up as to where the different groups are at in terms of their trainings. Yeah. So where are we? Are we all in sync with each other? Are some people ahead of others? Where are we at with that?
Well, and I believe everyone has attended. I'm pretty sure, and we did record some. So as far as I know, everyone has attended. So right now, you all are all on par. You've taken the same exact courses. As of this week, though, the READY group will jump ahead of you by a week because they are meeting Friday. You all are meeting next week, and then they'll meet next Friday again. So they're a couple of steps ahead of you.
Okay, so if we want to all get in sync in order to go large group and sort of be on the same page in terms of how many of the 6 hours we've done, I guess we'll just defer to you in terms of maybe the READY committee being a week ahead. We'll just not meet, not tomorrow, but the following Friday perhaps we won't meet. And meanwhile, we'll talk to Natalie about, executing that scheduling piece of getting everybody all in one place at one time.
Yeah, and it will actually work out because the READY committee has some additional work to do besides you all, like their charter and all of those things, working on that. So we can put that into the schedule so that you all meet up at the same time where you need to be.
Right, exactly. So that the READY committee would still meet, in other words, but not do the training piece, and that way it can get their other work done and sync up with the other people for the training.
Absolutely.
Okay, and just to be clear with everybody, you know, the large group would obviously mean that it would be an open meeting for anyone else who wants to come. But as I discussed with Pat, those people would not participate in any way. They would just be able to observe, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And what we found, you know, what we have found is, and you all sat through the trainings at this point, they're actually very helpful information for everybody. And so the wider public gets to listen in on, you know, on what you're learning as well. So it only is a benefit.
And Natalie?
Just a quick logistical scheduling question. Is there a reason why the commissioners and the Ready Committee couldn't all meet together for one?
Well, we're going to do 2 of those together. That's what we're talking about. The last 2 of the training will be everybody together.
Oh, including the Ready Committee.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, correct.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and also just to be clear, I mean, that's an additional nice piece that will come along with large group, is that our additional committee members that we have secured as of pretty recently, you know, people from the community, they have gotten to know, you know, myself and Dan and you and Natalie. They haven't necessarily gotten to know the rest of the board. And I think that would be great for everybody, that, you know, everybody kind of gets to know each other. Obviously, after the training, the committee will continue to do work just as a committee and report back to the whole board. But, you know, I definitely see it as ideal that everybody gets to know each other a little bit better. And Pat, you and I also talked about next steps. Yeah. Post this training, and then also post assessment. Obviously, the assessment might lead individually to steps that would relate to the assessment itself. But I think you and I talked about an additional training. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah. So once you get past all of this, the next step is to determine, you know, where do you want to go? You know, obviously there'll be a set of recommendations in my final report, which will drive where I recommend that you go. And then it's up to the Ready Committee to sort of pick that up, the board to give some shape to it, in other words, approve the recommendations. And then the Ready Committee to take that and to formulate that into a year-long plan.
Great. I just want to say that, you know, I think the trainings have been awesome so far, and I can't wait to continue with them. I really am glad that we broke it up into 1-hour sections, because, you know, the content is so big and important and heavy, and, you know, it's just, I think it's working really well to have broken it up into smaller chunks. And I look forward to joining, you know, as a large group, and I look forward to the unity that I hope will come from working together as one large group, as a board plus committee. And thank you, Dr. Effiam, for your continued work with us. It's just been, you know, invaluable. Matt.
Who's on the Ready Committee right now? Who makes up the Ready Committee?
Natalie?
Hi. Okay. JC Herman is on the Ready Committee. Iden Nolan and Patrick Nolan are both on the Ready Committee, and I'm gonna say her last name incorrectly. Elaine Seigel is on the Ready Committee. So it's those 4 with Martha, Dan, and myself.
And I have to say, it's a very impressive group, and I was very pleased with the breadth of their experience, even among the 4 of them.
Any other questions from anybody? Okay, thanks again, Dr. Effiam.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, wow, we still have a few items here. So we're moving into old business. We have discussed motion to establish safe and reasonable means to barbecue, etc. This has been tabled numerous times. A number of us, perhaps all of us, have spoken with Commissioner Mitchell about his desire to move forward with discussion and possibly action on this tonight. So I'm going to give you the floor, Matt.
Thank you. So what's changed since last month is that we've moved from stage 2 to stage 3, which during stage 2, and there's a stay-at-home order, there really shouldn't be any barbecuing in the park. Under stage 3, there could be barbecuing in the park, and I've seen barbecuing in the park since our last meeting. Therefore, I think we should have a coherent policy. We've been working on this since maybe October or November. Brian's been working hard on it, and I'd like to move forward on it tonight. And I would actually send this to Brian if he wants to go over his proposed policy.
Sure. What was in your board packet was the policy and procedures, suggested sign, and online reservation form. We would also, enforce or enhance all park activities and gatherings would be guided by the state of Illinois during the COVID-19 crisis. Late June, we're hoping to go to stage 4, which would be June 27th-ish, I believe. And that would be groups of 50 or less can gather. So in your packet, you have gathering, barbecue, and procedures, suggested signs, and online reservations. On March 14th, we toured the parks and looked at locations. So basically, that's where it sits. Needing some kind of action from you to go ahead and move forward.
This is Coyne. I move that we accept Brian's policy and procedures on the barbecuing.
Second the motion.
Okay, so in terms of discussing any of the elements of the barbecue policy or anything that we've discussed leading up until this point, is there anyone who would like to speak on that? Debbie, I see you with, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I don't see here when do people call in and ask for, or let the park district know that they're going to be lighting a fire? Did we not put that in there, or is it only a certain amount of people, or what?
Last time we discussed this, there was the discussion that people are going to pop into a park, maybe 10, 12 folks, and have a barbecue. We're not going to know about that. We do have a permit form or a reservation form, however you want to phrase it, that we would ask that they let us know so we can help. And so we then know we can clean up too. Shortly thereafter, meaning next Monday or whatever day it might be. So we do not have it in this packet, but it would be strongly suggested that people please request a reservation. This past week, we had a gal call, and she requested a gathering. Turned out it wasn't our park, but anyways, it was a city park, and it was a large group. I'm assuming she didn't get it because of the numbers, but basically, no, I don't have the reservation policy with me. Or in
Okay, well, just for the sake of when we vote, if we vote tonight, I'm still not in favor of that. I think whenever a fire is going to be lit in the park, I don't care if it's 2 people or 20 people, I think Ridgeville should be notified.
Okay, thanks, Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pat?
So in other words, just so I understand, you're suggesting or asking Debbie that there be a reservation completed before
a fire's lit in the park, I feel like Ridgeville needs to be notified so that if God forbid something happens, we know who was there and what was going on. And
so Brian, you're suggesting that it's strongly recommended. So it's either one or the other, I think.
Right.
I highly doubt it'll ever be one or the other because.
But it could be our rule.
What's that?
What are you saying? You don't think that people will?
Small groups will pop up all the time. I haven't seen them. Matt says he's seen them, but I have not. So if somebody drops a hibachi grill at Elks Park and plays kickball on the baseball diamond, and we don't know about it, that happens. Especially where we could help and get them to the designated area and have the call.
I feel like the message from the park district should be that you're required to let us know if a fire is going to be built. If people don't follow it, then we do whatever we do when people don't follow, you know? But I'm just,
Okay, so to be clear, the way the policy is written right now, it does just say reservations are suggested. So that sounds like we are not requiring them. And then if I'm hearing Brian correctly, perhaps the justification for not requiring them is that people are already grilling in the parks without reservations, and we're not concerned that we could really control for that.
Well, I'm just going on past board meetings. This is a policy and suggested signs and stuff. It's up to you folks to if it's required or not required. It's not required in Wilmette. It's not required in Skokie and in most parks. But if you want prime location and help and garbage disposal and recycling and all that stuff, it's to your advantage to ask for a permit or a reservation. So if you want it that way, you know, you need to tell me. We aren't gonna stop a barbecue in progress. We're just gonna try to help it.
Okay. Matt, I think you had your hand up at a point a few minutes ago.
I did, thank you. Debbie, I respectfully disagree. I don't think that the park district has a need to know. I don't think it changes the actual safety, the actual risk, whether we know or not. And what I think the actual risk is somebody getting burned. I'm not terribly concerned about the park catching on fire.
You know, I think last time we discussed small groups happen and over 15, which is in our ordinance, groups of more than 15 should get a reservation.
Yes.
Not necessarily for a barbecue, but for anything. But,
sure.
yeah, I mean, I disagree with you, Matt.
Sure, I know. And you and me have gone back and forth on this. I just don't think it changes the risk. And then going the other way, I think it could prevent people from actually using and enjoying the park.
Yeah, this is Coyne. I had my hand up, Martha, quite a long time ago.
Right. Hold on a second, Dan. This is an example of us needing to kind of, instead of just back and forth willy-nilly, you know, when someone's speaking, finish what you're saying. And it's my fault because I actually meant to specify that when we're done talking, if we could please let everybody know that we're done talking. It will help make it clear that that's a cue for the floor to be available to somebody else who has otherwise raised their hand or chooses to raise their hand at that point. So Matt, you did have the floor before and Debbie jumped in. So do you want to continue?
I will. I'll finish. Debbie, I apologize. I addressed you personally. I don't think the risk changes whether we know about it. I think it could discourage people from using the parks. I'm worried about kids getting burned, and I don't think that changes whether we know about it or not. So I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, and then your hand is new, correct, Debbie? So if Dan
I want to you know, it's like Matt's saying something to me, so I want to say something back.
Okay, so I will recognize you, and then we'll hear from Dan after that.
Yeah, that's fine. I feel like all people have to do is make a phone call. And if it discourages them from coming to the park, then they shouldn't be in the park. They can't make the phone call. But we've had this discussion before. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine. So let's just go on.
Okay, thank you. And then Matt, just in the interest of finishing that exchange, do you want to respond to her? You had your hand up.
I think it's disingenuous to say that people shouldn't use the park if they don't want to make a phone call. I think it's paternalistic. I think that the park is there for the people and not for us, and that we're stewards. And in my opinion, our stewardship shouldn't go to the point where people have to ask permission to use the park. I'm done.
Okay, so I just want to do one more response from Debbie, and then I want to go to Dan so we can complete this exchange.
I agree with you. We're stewards. We're stewards of the park. And I think you're kind of overreacting to what I'm saying. I don't mean it that way, that, oh my God, you can't use the park. I'm coming at it from a safety point of view. I have a fireman that lives across the street from me that I have discussed this with, who feels really strongly about it, so we'll just leave it where it is.
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, we're not talking about fires, we're talking about barbecues. There's a difference. Secondly, the whole point of this revision and this effort was out of our equity concerns we heard from our community as one of the most hurtful pieces of feeling left out, not being able to barbecue in our park. And thirdly, I think our initial effort was all about the equitable way of helping our community, everybody in our community, to feel welcome in our park by being able to barbecue safely. I think that our current policy that is on the table here is very safe, very reasonable. I think the reservation idea is a good one that's already in there. And that's simply if you want to guarantee that that spot's available for you and your family or your party, a reservation would help guarantee, you know, that spot. But people can still come and barbecue. And I like Brian's examples of different options we have for the hot coal distribution. Those all look safe, and I would trust Brian's judgment on what he thinks is best and what looks best. So I'm very much in favor of doing this and getting started with people feeling comfortable barbecuing as soon as possible.
Sorry, I was on mute. I looked away to make some notes. I did see Debbie's hand. Am I missing anybody who raised a hand before her? Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chat because this is where we, okay, so Debbie, go ahead.
Okay, I want it on the record that the alderman that is, the Brummel Park is in Alderman Rainey's ward, and people have wanted her to get rid of the barbecue grills. So I want that on the record.
We talked about Brummel and Totlots, and Brummel is, there's no barbecuing in Brummel.
Good, very good.
Okay, I see in the chat box that Dan was next. Am I seeing that correctly? Did you want to speak, Dan?
I think one of the glitches with the hand raising and the chat is just that interface. I raised my hand a number of times on different topics, but didn't get called. It's okay, but I'm just saying it's just something to tweak. I agree with you. That's a good idea, so people can kind of be in line, but I'm sure that's from before.
Okay, I would possibly recommend, if people agree with this, that on an issue like this where there's going to be really active discussion, a lot of people wanting to speak, wanting to respond to things that are said, you know, the possibility of addressing individual concerns as opposed to speaking more generally, that we may want to raise hands and keep them up, because in real time it's pretty challenging for Natalie to add it to the chat and for me to see it and, you know, proper order. So then, for instance, I see Jerry, because he's keeping his hand up, you know, and in the camera, you know what I mean? Dan, I will point out that you're kind of in the back of the, you know, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's a problem, but when you raise your hand from way back there, I don't see it anywhere near like when Jerry just did. So that's just one difference to point out. So, you know, I do want to stay away from people just jumping in, but I want to allow for, you know, timely discussion such that people can respond when they were addressed individually. So just let's move forward and we'll do the best we can. Jerry, did you want to go ahead?
It was just a suggestion on this point. I don't know how people have their screen set up. I happen to have the chat window open to the right side of my screen all the time, so I see all the dialogue there. And I notice that we, you know, in theory, we can all type into that. Rather than raise our hand, would it be appropriate that we just type our name in there when we want to get in line? Instead of relying, because the problem is Natalie is not always seeing everyone at once. It's hard for her to monitor everyone. But if we just typed in the box saying, hey, I'm here, I want, you know.
That's not a bad plan. I will say that for me so far, it's been easier to see hands than it is to see the chat. I did just do what you're saying. I forgot I can just drag it off to the corner instead of opening and closing. It just so happens that on my screen, Wes and Julie are not showing their video, so I can put it over their faces. There's not really a way, I don't think, to have it completely off to the side and read it at the same time. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
For me, the bar of options at the bottom, in fact, when I click the chat button, there's a bunch of buttons there. I click the chat button and it shrinks the overall screen and puts the chat to the side. So I still see Wes and everybody.
Okay. Well, perhaps perhaps we can actually try Jerry's idea, because one thing that I'm not super keen on of Natalie doing all the names is that it is sort of just this long chain that's kind of hard to keep track of. Whereas when somebody else chimes in, it says from Jerry Gibbs to everyone, and that way it'll help kind of break it up a little bit, if that makes sense. So let's switch to that. As of right now, just trying it out. We've got to be open to trying new things here and seeing what works best. So we'll continue with discussion. I don't know if anyone actively had a hand up yet, or if we should just open it up to anyone who wants to say something additional right now. Okay, so in the absence of anyone wanting to say something right now, I will speak. I don't honestly have strong preferences about what we do or don't do, what we allow, how we do it. My main concern is just that we're clear and consistent. So an example of consistency is that our ordinance does say some things around this. If we're creating policy that differs from that, I would like to just be clear about whether we feel that mandates a change to the ordinance and do it accordingly. That's just one point. I'm going to recognize Matt now in case you want to respond to that particular thing.
I do. I agree with you. I think we should formalize the policy first and then go back and update the ordinance separately.
Okay. So I'll continue then. You know, the idea of people getting burned has been raised, and so just in the idea, in the goal of being as complete as we possibly can be without going, into a point of excess. I just want to raise the idea of a liability concern, and so I don't know if that's a question for Charlie that we need to officially ask or not, but do we have any additional liability, given that we may establish, a policy that differs from what we've been doing, or the existence of a written policy where there was none before? Could people make claims against us and affect our insurance if there are fires, given that we have explicitly allowed for them? And just the liability concern is a question that I have. So I don't know if Charlie wants to weigh in on that, or if it's just kind of a note that that's something that I feel like is lacking here, that we haven't considered that. Maybe I'm wrong that would even be an issue. So yeah, Charlie, I see you now. Did you want to respond to that? And just to be clear, it's also the liability, like if personal property somehow gets burned, if I guess that's it. Kind of personal injury and personal property, and the possibility for damage there. What would our liability concern be, if any?
Yeah, I suppose there's always risk of liability if somebody gets hurt. And I didn't study the policy, but I'm assuming that when this was drawn up, based on the discussions I've heard, that Brian isolated the spots for the barbecue in particular locations, and attention was paid to that. We can always imagine something that'll go wrong that somebody will sue over, but we made reasonable efforts here, and you have insurance to protect against those strange cases. It's hard for me to imagine that somebody barbecuing in one of the places that Brian selected is going to end up causing a bunch of houses to burn down, and that somehow that's your fault because of where you located the barbecues, or that some kids on the swing set are going to catch fire. I mean, it just doesn't seem likely to me. But it's happening in the park anyway, and you're not taking steps to stop what's happening. So instead, you're implementing a policy to try to make things better and safer. And, you know, if anything, it should be improving the park district from a liability standpoint. But again, there's nothing, we're not building a roller coaster. We're not building, you know, some inherently dangerous thing. We're allowing barbecuing.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. The other issue that I wanted to talk about is that, you know, what's in front of us right now is a lot at once. If we were to approve, for instance, this in its entirety, it talks about online reservation information. It talks about proposed wording for signage. It doesn't say specifically where the signs would go, so that's kind of a hole in this as it stands, in my opinion. I also see some, you know, changes that I would make to the signage, but I know that, let's see. Did everybody just start to see Anne Rainey's screen?
Not the one crazy.
Something very weird just happened with my screen. What about you guys?
Me too.
Me too.
Now it's back.
Back.
I stopped the participant sharing. I think she probably did that on accident.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, I think I was about to say that the, you know, I was discussing with Pat McCourt, and so I don't know if he's ready or interested in weighing in at some point here, but I was discussing the idea that, you know, some of us feel a resistance to additional signage being, you know, put in the parks just because of the eyesore that signs create when in an otherwise mostly green space. And I do share in that concern. I also will say, though, that whenever we're making policy more clear, which is a good pursuit, generally speaking, part of making sure that that now clear policy travels all the way to our patrons such that they know that it exists and know what it is. It, you know, may in fact be signage. So I'm kind of conflicted on that point personally, because I don't really want additional signs, and yet I think it's a great way to be clear with people about what's going on. I will say that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we discussed the possibility that the signs themselves can go onto the coal receptacles in order to not create an additional sign pole that, you know, obscures views, etc., and yet conveys the information. It also, of course, draws attention to the coal container itself, so that people will see that it's there and the information. You can't miss the information and be barbecuing if the coal receptacle itself, you know, has the signage. And speaking of the coal receptacles, I just wanted to be clear with you, Brian. Have those been purchased yet or not?
Oh, they have not.
Okay, so that brings me to another point, which is that I was discussing with Matt the idea that if it ends up that there are pieces of this barbecue policy that we can agree on, even though we may not achieve full agreement on the entirety of what's in front of us, which is a lot at once, perhaps a point that we could agree on is that we like the idea of coal receptacles and we want to approve the purchase of those. Because that would also allow us, once they're here and they can be put where we designated those spots, that could allow us to take an additional step of, okay, are signs going on these receptacles? Are they going near them? Are we skipping signs altogether? You know, what exactly is going on the sign? We don't have to finalize that right now necessarily. And I do like the idea of sort of looking at this in stages, especially if there are pieces we can agree on now, even though we might not be able to agree on everything. I was just looking at Anne's note in the chat, which actually reminds me that I also wanted to be clear that it's a very strong preference for me that all recycling bins that we've put in the parks are as close as possible to trash bins, so that when people are disposing of waste, it's very clear that they have those two options and they can put their stuff in the appropriate bin. So that's sort of a general note, but obviously it applies to barbecuing. There's one last thing I want to say that I was talking to Pat about earlier too. The pictures that we have that are supposed to show us where these spots are that we agreed upon. Number one, the pictures are horrible and they're worse than ever before. So this does not work. This is not, you know, acceptable imagery to use because it's just not clear in the picture what we're even looking at. And I do think it's actually worse than we've seen previously. And this was brought up previously and it hasn't improved. So that's something I'd like to see moving forward, is if we're gonna use imagery, it needs to be clear. And then my other point about the images is that I'm not clear at all, and so if you can clear this up for me, please, Brian, about why we need a barbecue spot at Cayman West and at Leiter Park, because in my memory of when we walk that and when I go to Leiter Park, and that's basically the same area. I mean, Asbury is to the east of both of those sections, and I can't even picture why we need two different spots there.
If you remember, probably in February, I walked the parks with the Evanston Fire Department. And we went to every park, and this was a yes, the tot lots were a no. So we walked to every major park and found the location that they thought was the safest. And you can do anything you want, but Cayman West was one of the larger parks. So it's basically Leiter, Cayman West, Cayman East, Ridgeville Park, and Elks, the main parks. If Cayman West is objectionable, that's up to you. 4 of the 5 parks, I think, is fair. Cayman
Okay.
West
I
has a house right next to the area, so that could be an issue.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm asking my question correctly. And then Dan, I did see your hand and I see the note in the chat, so you'll be next. To me, picture yourself on Asbury, right at that northernmost corner where you could start to enter Cayman West. It feels like you start to walk into Cayman West, and directly to your south, there starts to be the swing set at a certain point once you've crossed enough green space. The older swing set, you keep going, and then a little bit deeper west into that plot, you're starting to see the other equipment, the little digger that's further south, etc., fire truck or whatever that is. But you keep going and you end up at Leiter. So you're walking along that fence that's shared with the alley, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not clear on where we're putting a Cayman West spot and a Leiter spot, because that's kind of all one continuous area, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, did you say you're not clear why or where?
Like where there are two separate places if it's basically the same area that we're talking about.
Well, Leiter, it's probably 100 yards apart, one on each side of Asbury. Cayman West is in the center of the park on the north side, where we discussed, where we talked, where the alleys intersect. So it's easy to unload. Leiter Park is a little more difficult. It's in the same general area, halfway through the park along the fence line.
Okay. Just to be clear, before we move on, is that answer clear to everybody else? Does that make sense to everybody? If it makes sense to you, will you raise your hand, please? Okay. So then let's go ahead to Dan, because he had his hand up.
I hope that we don't stall this anymore. It's been many, many months. This is exactly the plan that we all agreed to and went through and checked it, verified in person with a special meeting. I think it's time, now that this beautiful weather is here, that we find a way to encourage our neighbors, all of our neighbors, to join our park and have fun by barbecuing.
Okay, thanks for that, Dan. I'm glad you brought up the fact that you believe that we had consensus in our physical meeting, because I've been meaning to say also that that meeting, unfortunately, was very rushed and incomplete. And Dan, you in particular, literally, said, let's hurry up, let's get through this. And you left the meeting before everyone else. And it was just frustrating to me, because we had all decided that we were getting together physically for the purpose of clarifying all of that. And then because it was pushed that we speed through it, I didn't achieve the clarity that the meeting was supposed to offer to all of us. And maybe I'm alone in that feeling, but that is definitely how I felt. And I think it's too bad, because it was a wasted opportunity, in my opinion, to get clarification so that we could, in fact, move forward on this. I think actually everybody wants to move forward and get clarity, but I personally don't see a need to rush this if we don't have consensus and if there's points that are confusing or problematic to people. I think, Debbie, did you have your hand up next?
Oh, I thought you said, Martha, during your comments that if someone is talked to, just like you shamed me, that the other person can respond. Can I respond to your shaming?
You can respond to what I just said, sure.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the first I heard of your disgruntlement about our meeting. I wish you could have done that privately and talked about it before, because it was many months ago. I didn't know that's how you felt, and I'm sorry. But actually, we made a motion at our meeting to end the meeting, and that's when I left, after the second and the unanimous vote to end our meeting. That's when I left. I didn't want to stand around any longer because the meeting was over.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't have any technical disagreement with that, but I will say that I'm pretty sure it was you who made the motion, and it felt rushed. And in the moment, I'm pretty sure, but I will speak for myself, that voting to adjourn, it was made very clear by your behavior and by your words that you wanted the meeting to be over. And it was just, you know, it was a consensus that was kind of pressured. I just, you know, I wish we had gone into more detail. I wish we had had clarity. I wish we had not rushed through it. I do believe that I would feel more comfortable and clear about the physical things that we talked about when we had that meeting if it hadn't been rushed in that manner. So I just think I think it's really too bad. It was a great opportunity for us to achieve clarity, and that's not what happened, not from my perspective. Do you want to respond to that again, Dan?
I think this is an example of our unhealthy management of our park district. I just think it's embarrassing. I think it's also a slap in the face of our community that came and spoke to us months ago about this is one of the pieces as an example of people of color feeling that they aren't welcome in our park. And here we are arguing over details and egos and not allowing people to legally barbecue in our parks. It's just shameful.
Okay, thank you. I think you were next, Debbie.
I think Matt's next.
Let's see. Oh yeah, in the list. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was remembering that you had raised. Yeah, let's
My
go.
comments were addressed. My comments were addressed. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't feel comfortable about it either, and I'm sure that I commented that day that the barbecues that came in East and West, how close are they to that fence and the people there? You know, is it fair to put barbecues on Cayman West, I think it is, near the fence where those houses are? I don't think it is.
Debbie, just for clarity, are you addressing someone particularly that you
No,
want to?
I'm just, no, not anyone particularly.
Okay. I just want to be on the record too to respond to some of the things that Dan said. He's referenced a number of times that we heard from the community about barriers to barbecuing. You know, I'm very sorry if I missed something or I'm forgetting something, but other than Dan himself bringing it up and alleging that we had a barbecue ban that we never had, and we've clarified that now, I don't recall an issue from the community. And historically speaking, according to my conversations with Brian and Natalie, you know, for the most part, people either call and ask if they can barbecue and they're told yes, or people just go ahead and do it, and nobody's actually seen much of an issue with that so far. So, you know, unless we are able to enact some clear policy tonight that differs from that, currently barbecuing is allowed. It was never not allowed. So, you know, but if people thought it wasn't allowed, and I'm not even clear if that was actually an issue in the community, if that was an issue, that's a problem for sure. And perhaps it's a result of the lack of clarity from our policy. And that's why we're talking about this. That's why we're trying to get clarity and get consensus and move forward. But again, I don't want to rush through it. I want us to feel good about it. Debbie, did you have your hand up again, or was Pat next? Okay,
No.
Pat.
I just wanted to kind of give you my sense of, I think what I just heard Martha say is that, you know, there were some questions. This wasn't a done situation. People can barbecue in the park. We've encouraged that. What we wanted to do was encourage it even greater with a more deliberate encouragement to use the parks that we decide are the best locations for a barbecue. And I envisioned it as that someone would contact the park and say, we want a reservation for Lighter Park. We would then have our individual, they'd get all the details, when they're going to do it, when, how many people, whatever. No further paperwork. We've got that information. Our guys would then put the coal receptacle where they want it within Lighter Park. We would have garbage facilities and recycling nearby. We would probably have a couple of picnic tables. If it was 6 people, maybe 1 picnic table. If it was 10 people, maybe 2 picnic tables. So we would be involved. Our people would do some work to encourage it, and then the barbecue would occur. And then on Monday or whatever the day was following, they would come and remove the garbage. So it would be a more orderly, it would be a more personal, it would be more Ridgeville involved process. And it just seems to me that if we first deal with call the office and say, you're going to have a barbecue, tell us what time, how many people, boom. Okay, we'll have some equipment there for you. We'll bring the coal, we'll bring the receptacle there. We buy a couple of them to begin with, maybe 4, whatever. And then we clean up when it's done. So we're involved, but we're only involved to help and to encourage and to make it an easier process. Not make it complicated, not sign anything, just tell us when it's gonna be, where it's gonna be, and how many people. Make sure we don't have a conflict, somebody else is there. So I think there are some details that need to be worked out, and it gets more complicated. So no, we have never agreed to do this yet. We've already got a policy on the books. Let that stand if you want. But if we want to take it to the next invitation level, the accommodating and the personal touch that Ridgeville can do because of our size, I think that's worthwhile. I also disagree with using Cayman West. It's not necessary. We've got one at Leiter. We've got ones at Cayman East. It's not necessary in Cayman West because not only are there no trees in the proposed place, there's never been a picnic table in that area. There's no reason to, they've got to go down a private alley basically because that's the front of several people's homes, the townhouses there. So I think that location is unnecessary. The other locations I'm fine with. So that's my vision of this. Clearly there's others have a disagreement, but I wanted to at least present that.
Thank you, Pat. Matt, you were next then.
Thank you. You guys know how I feel. So I'm not going to go back into it, except I just want to address the Cayman West. Is one of the concerns that we've had is if there's more than one group barbecuing at a time. And I think if we had 3 approved areas over Leiter, Cayman East, Cayman West, it can accommodate more people at the same time with reservations or without. That's it.
Okay. That kind of reminds me though that whatever we do in the area of designating areas for barbecuing and having coal receptacles, some of this remains to be seen if any of these measures lead to additional barbecuing activities happening, which they very well might, and also would be, a perfectly fine thing. It may even lead to a level where we feel like our existing designated areas are insufficient and we see if we can do anything additional. I'm not sure that we'll have a lot of room to wiggle there because we've already designated a couple of parks as unsafe inherently. But perhaps Cayman West, which, correct me if I'm wrong, west of Asbury, right? Continuous property with Leiter.
No, Cayman West is east of Asbury. Leiter is west of Asbury.
Okay, all right. Well, again, this is partly that I'm not clear from the pictures, and also that yeah, Brian.
Cayman East and West are separated by Barton.
Okay, all right. That makes a lot more sense now that you've said that to me. And so yeah, that actually, I was gonna say that, okay, what I was gonna say is no longer applicable. I will say though that another issue that I wanted to raise in the event that we were to take some action tonight that would lead to, perhaps more barbecuing than we're seeing, or just the action of, our actions leading to people feeling like, well, you just said that this is, how we can barbecue, and then going ahead with it. We are in stage 3. I don't know if anyone said this so far, but relating to barbecue specifically, we are, if we're not putting any numbers on it in any way, shape, or form, which is fine if that's what we decide to do, we are otherwise in a situation where groups of more than 10 are not supposed to be gathering right now. So if we were to move forward with action tonight, I personally feel from a public health obligation perspective that we need to be very explicit about how stage 3 of COVID-19, procedures factor in here. And for instance, if we're not going to have any number requirements moving forward, fine. But until we're in stage 5, groups of, or I suppose stage 4 is the one that's 50 and under is okay. So, we could move into stage 4 pretty soon. I'm not quite sure if anyone has estimates on that. But I just want to put that out there, that if we're not taking a stance specifically about how our barbecuing procedures should manifest in accordance with the recommendations right now on limiting and social distancing, I think that's irresponsible, because I don't think it addresses the very serious health concern that's going on right now. So that's just another concern I have, that I thought I would put out there to just be complete discussion wise. I'll call on you in just a second, Debbie. I just want to reiterate that, Matt, it's your agenda item. In terms of moving forward with action, I don't know if you put more thought to this, but if we can vote on specific points in order to be able to move forward with elements of this, that's perhaps just a suggestion of how we could go. We've taken up a lot of time discussing it. I want to feel like since we are discussing it, everyone's having their fair share. But I also want to move us along. So Debbie, did you want to go next?
All right. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think there shouldn't be any question. If the state of Illinois is in stage 3, then as Ridgeville Park District, we have to follow that and demand that that's followed in our parks. And if that's no more than 10 people, as I think it is in stage 3, then that's what we have to hold to. It's not that people can decide this. This is a park. This isn't their backyard. I don't think we have any wiggle room there.
Yeah, no, all park activities and gatherings will be guided by the state of Illinois and the Illinois Department of Health during the COVID crisis. So when we go to phase 4, if somebody called and said, I want to have a barbecue with 60, 80 people, the answer would be no.
Right, Brian, but if we're not requiring people to call, period, we don't have any way to enforce that. And if we enact policy tonight that incentivizes people, or it just brings it all up and makes it clear, hey, come and barbecue, but we're not talking about any limitations that should be in effect, it's just incomplete and irresponsible. And if we're not requiring a phone call, we don't have that opportunity to say no to those people because of those concerns. So Matt, yeah, you're next.
Oh, this doesn't have anything to do with our barbecue policy, and I don't think it should be incorporated in it. It's our overall park district policy to comply with the state of Illinois. If there's 50 people in the park and they're not barbecuing, it's the same issue. This doesn't have to do with our barbecue policy. It has to do with and I agree, we should follow the state guidelines for COVID, of course. But it doesn't need to be incorporated into our barbecue policy any more than it needs to be incorporated into any other policy. I'm done.
Dan, did you have your hand up or were you just scratching your head? Oh, okay. So Debbie?
Well, I do think it has to do with it. If there are 50 people in the park and they didn't come together and they're in different parts of the park, that's okay. I think that maybe we should table this until we have a clearer vision of what's going to happen in stage 4, stage 3.
Matt?
So honestly, the reason I brought this up and I chose not to table it this time is because under stage 3 guidelines, up to 10 people are allowed to gather in the park. If they're from the same household, that's it. If there's 10 people that aren't from the same household, they can gather in the park with face masks and 6 feet apart. That's the current guidelines. So you could have a barbecue where people wear masks and are 6 feet apart. And like I've said, I've seen people barbecuing at Elks, and I think we should move forward. And now is barbecue season. Like, I understand that we pushed this in February, but this is when we talk about it, and this is when we should have a policy.
Right. So Debbie, I'll go to you next, but I just want to respond to that real quick, which is that as has already been said, I just want to reiterate, there's nothing preventing people from barbecuing right now. Our current practice is that it is allowed. and people either ask and they get a yes, or they go ahead and do it and nobody takes issue with it, unless any residents choose to take issue and call the police or something crazy like that, which I would like to see them not doing, but is one of many things we don't control currently and would have trouble trying to do. So, you know, I get the idea that, you know, sooner rather than later, we put a finer point on this, we put it into writing, we finalize it, and we move forward. And I'm all in favor of that once we can agree on some of these things. But as to the idea that people can't barbecue unless we enact policy tonight, that's incorrect. We already allow for it. And so, Pat, I see you, but Debbie was going to be next.
That's okay. You just brought up it's okay.
Okay. I also just want to say that given that people can barbecue right now already, I would like to see us go ahead and order those coal receptacles. That's a very specific step that we've talked about. I'm pretty sure we all agree on that. That's action we could take tonight. Those coal receptacles, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, they're permanent. They're big and heavy. They would stay where they are, right?
Most likely, yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. So assuming they would stay where they are, it's sort of like we've already designated the areas. We have agreement there, I'm pretty sure. That's part of what we could put to a vote. We also have agreement that the coal receptacles will be a new addition to our barbecue offerings, you know, so that it's not just on the individual to dump it where they shouldn't be or take it out with them. It makes sense to have a receptacle. We could carry additional pieces of this forward by motion in the future. I mean, we're in a position where we can move forward on at least 2 points of this. So, you know, I could make that motion or somebody else could, but first, Pat.
I would like to suggest that we have we get 2 coal receptacles that are movable, that are not in a permanent location. So we can put them where we want to, or when somebody wants them in one of the parks. That was the point I was going to make a minute ago. So not permanent, they're not going to be sitting there all the time. They're going to be brought to the park, at least initially, so we understand where people want to have the barbecues. So we've got that flexibility.
Okay, and I don't disagree with that necessarily, but I view that to be a very different proposal than what we've talked about so far in terms of the things that Brian has specifically suggested we purchase, and in terms of the way that those function, and also in terms of the fact that we're going to buy those particular items because the designated areas that we've already, you know, had some agreement on in the form of walking the parks, etc. The idea was that we're saying where people can barbecue. And so I have a concern that if our coal receptacles are portable, that we're sort of getting away from that idea of having specific permanent designated areas. And I just don't understand if, you know, that confuses me. And then the other idea is that if they're portable, we have to make sure that somebody doesn't just walk off with them if they end up attracted to somebody. If they're permanent and they're heavy and they're obviously, like, you know, not going anywhere, to me, that's more comfortable, that's always there. You know, anyone who goes in the park sees it, knows what it's for, and that helps to say, oh, look, you know, you can barbecue here, and that's where you put your coals. I mean, that's I think what we're all hoping to achieve. I don't mean to speak for anybody, but having more clarity to the public that you can barbecue and here's where you can do it. That's, you know, that's essentially what we're talking about here. Did somebody have a hand? Pat, did you have a hand again or no?
I did.
No, but I think you just have to determine exactly where you're going to put it, because there's the issues with access, and, you know, at Cayman East, we had it close to the area where the truck drives through the opening there between the fence and the garage. So there's some issues in terms of where exactly it would go. So I was looking for some flexibility in putting it in a location that's appropriate, basically.
Okay, and that reminds me that you talked about picnic tables too. So that's kind of a whole different approach that we could do in addition or do instead of. The idea that we would set up picnic tables when we know that a certain number of people are going to be there. And that's kind of cool in my opinion, because then we're really, like, specifically accommodating the number of people that we know are going to be there. And I think people would appreciate that. But I also like the idea of permanent benches that, you know, picnic tables that have been put in place near enough to the coals that they're just ready in the event that people don't want to make a reservation and they just want to show up. In my list, I see Pat, Matt, Dan. So I think Matt was next.
Thank you. Martha, I appreciate your idea about breaking this up. It seems like we don't have a consensus, or maybe even perhaps a majority. I agree with you that we could move forward on getting coal receptacles tonight. I would also offer that we could move forward on what's in our packet as gatherings, barbecue policy and procedure, and adding and voting on that tonight. And what that would do is keep our existing policy with additional rules regarding dumping of coals, dumping of trash, no alcohol in the parks, and specific areas. That if we want to move forward on more finer points later, I'm happy to do that. I keep hearing that barbecuing is allowed in the parks, and so this is what I'm proposing tonight would offer additional rules and guidelines.
Okay.
Without getting into some of the points that we're not agreeing on.
Are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. Just to be clear, this very first page, it's not the first page, but the page entitled Gatherings, Barbecue Policy and Procedure, I'm ready to approve that. As to which receptacles we're buying, Brian, if you could just give us some clarity, there's two different items here. So were you proposing we buy them both or pick one or the other?
I'm going to check the weight and then probably the lighter of the two. I don't know how much they weigh.
And then how many were you proposing to buy?
I have 5.
I'm sorry?
5. I'm sorry.
5 of them. Okay. So then Dan was going to talk after you, Matt. Are you making a motion or should we go to Dan first?
I'm ready to make a motion after discussion.
Okay, so then, yeah.
The sense of what it's going to be.
Okay, so let's just hear from Dan and then see if there's any other discussion that needs to happen.
Well, now that I heard from Matt, I have 2 questions and one that has to be answered first. Matt, procedurally, since the motion's already on the table and you seconded it, if I call the question, do we have to take a roll call?
We do always have to take a roll call via Zoom meeting.
My point is the procedure, there's already a motion and a second. We discussed, if I call the motion, if I call for the question, do we have to vote on my motion?
Just for clarity, which specific motion was made that we approved the entirety of
I originally started this discussion by making the motion to approve Brian's barbecue policy. It was seconded by Matt, and I want to know procedurally, if I call the question, do we have to vote on my motion?
Thank you. Yes, I believe there's an open question. We should vote on it. I think you could rescind your motion.
I call the question.
Oh, okay, so I'd like to actually hear from Charlie before we move to that, because he had his hand up to answer your question, Dan.
Okay, so hang on just 1 second. I was listening on the phone, so I have a little bit of an echo. The question has been called, so if now put to a vote on whether we vote on the existing motion that's been seconded.
Okay, but if there's a desire and probably a clear sense that a different motion would pass, is there a way to just strike the motion instead of voting on it, or now that the question has been called, we have to vote?
So the question has been called, and that's that's what happens. Nothing else can intervene on that. The question is called, and we now need to vote on whether to vote on the existing motion.
Okay, so we're voting on the motion, or we're voting on whether we're voting on the motion?
No, you're voting on whether we're going to vote on the existing motion.
Okay.
That's Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, because of the call to question. That's why we're at that point? Okay. So then, Julie, please, a roll call vote on whether we're voting on the original motion or not.
Okay, let me just write that down. Okay, Braun,
No.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
No.
McCourt,
No.
Mitchell.
No.
So the calling the question failed. That means we're still in discussion of the original seconded motion.
So
Okay.
I'd like to make another motion for action.
Do we have to strike the first motion?
No, we just didn't vote on it, right?
The first motion is still pending. We don't have to vote on it now. In fact, you don't vote on it now because you just decided you're not going to vote on it now.
But how do we get rid of it altogether if we want a different motion?
Well, now somebody's moving to amend the motion or modify it, I think.
Okay,
I would move to modify the motion.
I'll second.
I would move to modify, or is there any discussion, or do you want to hear it?
Well, I think you need to tell them how you want to modify it, then it would be seconded, then it would be discussed.
Sure.
Okay.
My first motion is to authorize the executive director to purchase 5 ash receptacles.
Okay, and that's your amendment to the motion?
The first part of a modified motion.
Okay, do you want to discuss it in parts?
Yes.
Okay, so you need a second then for that part, or we're going to second the entire motion at once at the end?
Second it. We'll talk about it. We can vote on it.
Okay, so we're going to have individual parts, votes on the parts of your motion, correct? Okay, so then I will second that part. Is that how we're moving forward? Okay, and then any additional discussion from anyone about those receptacles? I guess Brian had said he's going to go with the lighter weight one. Is that what you had said, Brian?
Most likely, yes. I want to see him like that.
Okay. Anyone have anything additional to say about the receptacles themselves and the motion to go ahead with the purchase?
I would like to amend it to 4 receptacles.
Okay, and do you mind sharing, Pat, where you see those 4 going specifically, given that we had originally talked about 5?
We should not put one in Cayman West.
Okay, Charlie, is Pat's is that an amendment to Matt's motion? I mean,
So that's just discussion. He hasn't amended it. Commissioner Mitchell may decide that he agrees with that. I don't know. This is just discussion right now.
okay. Well, I would add, or I would respond by saying I'm fine with 4 or 5. So if anyone else wants to weigh in with a preference there, and if we want to make a change to the proposal of 5, we did originally say 5. I'm okay with that. Now that I have clarity that Cayman West is in fact east of Asbury, I do see that as 3 separate locations. I think they're sort of all in a row and perhaps excessive. And if we decide that we do in fact need 3 when we first go with 2, we can always buy another one. So I'm fine with going with 4. That's kind of how I feel about it.
I'd prefer to stick with 5.
Okay, any additional discussion about that particular motion? Let's go to a roll call vote then. And can you just be clear one more time, Matt, about what we're voting on?
Authorizing the executive director to purchase 5 ash receptacles.
Okay, Julie.
Whole receptacles.
Whole receptacles, thank
All
you.
receptacles. Okay, Braun. Braun, I can't hear you.
Sorry. No.
Okay.
I
No.
vote no.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
No.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like we are passing with the 3-2 that we will buy the 5 receptacles. I just want to note that if for any reason, once we have the 5, we feel like we want to change the location of where there's a going for any reason, I would think that in theory we could figure that out once they're in our possession. at your recommendation, Brian, or perhaps you just stick with the original plan. Matt, did you want to go then to a second part of your motion?
Sure. Second modified motion is to accept Executive Director Rosinski's policy that was included in the packet marked gatherings, barbecue policy and procedure as policy of the Ridgeville Park District.
I want to just be clear that we're talking about the one page that's titled Gatherings, Barbecue, Policy, and Procedure.
Correct.
Okay. In the event that we are talking about just that one page, I will second. Anyone would like to discuss or propose any changes or anything? Debbie?
So that doesn't have anything to do with calling in or anything else. It's just those 3 paragraphs, right, on that page that we're voting on. Is that right, Matt? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
So I just want to say from a discussion perspective that I view this to be stating the obvious. This document kind of includes all of the things that already exist, that we follow the City of Evanston's policy on alcohol. We you know, obviously we didn't want people dumping coals at the base of trees, period, but now we're actually supplying the place for the coals. So I think that's obviously additional to what we've offered historically, and I think that's great. And then the park's opening and closing, again, that's not different than what we're doing right now. It's just making it clear to people. So, you know, the designated areas is, again, a new piece relative to what our policy or our practices, I should say, have been up until this point. One point of clarification from Brian, when it says we allow it from May 1 through September 30th, are we saying that you can only grill during those times, or that reservations are only available during those dates?
That's the fire department's recommendation because of leaves in the fall and weather in the spring.
Okay, so I think
the fall, the chance of fire is higher.
Okay, I view that as beneficial too, to be really clear with the public then that there are some limitations from a calendar perspective about when it's, you know, safe and when it's not allowed. Just a point of cleaning this up, it's just lacking a period after September 30th, because that's sort of a separate piece from going into to reserve a barbecue, call this number. I mean, unless I'm wrong about that. We just have to have a period and capitalize the next sentence. I think it's good to go. I think we can always add to it. We can restrict it if we see a need. We can even just leave it as it is once we have the receptacles and we have this. I don't know. I mean, it remains to be seen if there's additional pieces that we have to specify, but I think this is great. And so is there any additional discussion on this particular part of the motion? Or questions? No. Okay, I think we'll move to a roll call vote on that piece then.
Ron,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
No.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay. So Matt, does that conclude the motion that you are making, or the amendment to your motion rather?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously we can continue discussion as needed or desired in the future about additional pieces of barbecue. But I think this is a great start, and I'm glad we could take some action on it. Moving on then to the next item of old business, which I understand it to be the plan that we're tabling that yet again.
Sure. I'd move to table that as non-essential business.
I will second that we table that. Is that needing a vote? Is that how we do the tabling?
I think so.
Okay. So Julie, then we'll roll call
Yeah.
the tabling.
Ron,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
I'm sorry, which one are you?
tabling the conversation about the IAPD self-assessment.
Okay, yes.
And Mitchell.
Yes.
Okay. So that would take us to new business. I just want to note that it's 10:30. I'd like to try our best to move forward with everything we have to talk about as quickly as we can. It's just getting late. First, we have discussed 2020, 2021 tentative budget, and I'll give the floor to Brian.
Okay, so you have the tentative budget in front of you. I want to emphasize tentative because there's a lot of things that may happen and then a lot of adjustments to be made. Some of the stuff we discussed tonight. If you look at the budget on the corporate side, I'm going to give you the large items that we put in the budget. In CA6, we added a copier. It's on its last leg, and the copier expense would be about $6,000. In CA6, we added new furniture for the office. It's archaic, and that's about $5,000. In CA13, we added, I don't have the amount in front of me, approximately $3,500 to fix the second floor, which would be encasing, peeling paint, or putting up 3/8 inch drywall on to make it more presentable. It's old and it needs a facelift. CA21 board development. I put the same as last year for equity, $14,000. That's something that we need to discuss over time, and how much we might need, more or less. CA51, garage art studio. We need a few new windows and gutters. So we put $12,000 in the budget for that. The gutters are banged up and there's approximately 5 or 6 windows that need to be replaced. 908 Seward, there's 7 small windows throughout the building that we would like to replace, and that's $6,500. The shed needs to be tuck pointed and painted on the other 3 walls after the mural, and that's approximately $5,000. Then on the recreation side, R17, big ticket, Cayman West and Ridgeville Park's 2 courts that need to be resurfaced at approximately $21,000. Those are the big ticket items.
All right, Brian, can you please remind us what the step is with the budget next meeting, if anything?
Oh, you need to pass the tentative budget. You can pass this, it means nothing because you still have July to talk about it, August to talk about it, and September to finalize it. And that would be your appropriation. Once you finalize the appropriation, you're locked in. And then the tax levy would be in December. There's no changing the budget after September.
Do you have the parking lot in here?
No.
Okay.
The parking lot is not in there, but the parking lot would be wonderful in unexpended funds.
And Brian, if we want to use unexpended funds for the parking lot, how and when should we do that?
That is a great question. Timing is everything. I don't know the answer. Probably early spring or very late fall. But I don't know. I'd have to check with the professionals.
Okay, and I think we should go ahead and look into that and see what the recommendation is. But I mean also along the lines of the process for officially designating some of those unexpended funds for that purpose. Maybe that's a question for Jerry. What is it that we need to do?
I think you just need to put it in the line item, but there's Jerry.
Yeah, he's correct. It's when you look at Exhibit A of the budget, that tells in the process that says here's where we're getting the money to do these projects. The budget pages in front of that are saying these are the projects that we want to do. So that's where we would identify and say, okay, we're not going to use a tax levy to do those projects. We're going to use our fund balances to do those projects.
Okay. And that's part of our otherwise prescribed budgeting process then? It's not like it's some specific separate piece. It's just part. Okay. Well, I would propose, and I don't know that I need to make a motion because it seems like it's just part of the overall budgeting process and it would get approved as part of the proposed budget. I would like to suggest that we add that parking lot resurfacing or whatever we're calling that via, funded by unexpended funds. Pending, of course, final approval to the budget and pending, what that would come in at cost-wise, and if we have to put it out to bid, et cetera. I have no idea what a parking lot will cost us. But it sounds like we have some money to put into to use for some projects that we didn't otherwise plan, but nonetheless need to do. So I think we should do it.
I'll get some numbers.
Okay. I'd like to talk to the city too and see if there's the possibility that they're doing any similar surfacing projects, because there's a possibility that we might both benefit financially if we put projects together. So just an idea that I'll look into. Any other notes, ideas on the budget issues? I mean, we'll just kind of, we're not taking any action, correct? We're just discussing.
Correct.
And so I understand that we've put this budget together, as you said earlier, with the hopes that we're able to offer similar programming as we always would have planned.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. I just want to say, and I've said this before, I want to reiterate moving into this next budget, I would like to see us do more advertising on social media. It's really, you get a lot of bang for your buck. You can cater the ads to certain zip codes, certain age groups, certain demographics of all kinds. Print ads are great in some ways, but social media advertising, of course, for the population of people who, are present in social media in large ways. It's a great way to let people know what we're doing, just achieve a greater level of people seeing those things. Natalie already posts things on Facebook, and that's great. But when you pay Facebook a little bit of advertising money, a ton more people see it. It also gives you tons of data on how many people are seeing it, who's clicking it, all this stuff. You put an ad in the paper, you don't know who sees it, blah, blah, blah. So I see that we have 2 ads per month, $50 times 12. If we have any wiggle room, I'd like to see us do additional ads. I'd like to see us advertise special events. Wherever it seems like we have some content that we want more people to see and we can boost it, I'd like to see us do it. So if in the next version of the budget, we could maybe see that beefed up a little bit, I would love that. Pat.
Do we have any trees planned? You did
Yeah,
7.
we have $6,500 in
Where's that?
beautification. It's the Van Haven money. It's under capital projects. Bond and Haven bequest $6,500. That's trees, shrubs, bushes.
Yeah, do you have the line item on that, Brian?
It's a separate.
Oh, it's the last page. Last page.
It's actually at the bottom of the first page. Capital improvements, 6,500. That's the Bond and Haven. It's for trees and shrubs. See 600 at the bottom of the first.
Oh, yeah, I see it. I got it. Sorry. Okay.
I've encouraged Brian to purposefully each year make sure he draws down the Vanden Haven bequest with a project line item like this, or will take an unreasonably long period of time to deploy that money. So at one point, I think there was discussion that a 10-year time period was a reasonable time period to deploy that money. So 65,000 divided by 10 is how we got to 6,500. So at minimum, I think we should always be planning 6,500 until that money is used up. We can certainly go higher, but at minimum, that number I think is the target to you.
Debbie.
I would like to reiterate Martha's suggestion to hook in with the city. They do parking lots and trees every year, and we could get in on a project with them.
Brian, could you please highlight for me if we have a section on here for equity expenditures?
Yeah, that's in board development. That's the 14,000. CA 21.
Okay, I
Board
see it.
Development and activities. You go to the line items. Equity outreach, $14,000.
Okay, great. I think if Dr. Patricia Effiam is still listening, I'd love to make a note that, you know, with no huge urgency, but we could certainly start thinking about and eventually planning for what that looks like into our next budget of how we're spending our equity dollars. And I'm glad to see that we're budgeting the same amount as the previous year. That's great, at least. Brian, you replaced a bunch of benches. Did we have some that were slated for replacement in this next round?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, we were already in the process right now of having replaced some benches. Do we have other ones that are planned for this next round of?
Yeah, they would be, Reba needs 2, Elks possibly 2. Ridgeville Park down by the basketball courts, another 2. I can you know, this is something for a quick discussion. I know it's getting late, but I could probably order those on this year's budget, and then have more benches for other parks as we go through the stages. The park that's done is Brummel. That has all new benches.
Matt, did you have your hand up? Oh, Matt, you did not. Jerry does have his hand up. Go ahead, Jerry.
I've encouraged Brian to try and fully expend this year's appropriation. So on the basis of what he just said, I would strongly prefer to see him try and get it in this year's budget.
I would second that idea because also the sooner we can, I don't know what the turnaround is, Brian, once you've decided that those benches are going to get replaced, but if we get some benefit in this nice weather season of additional new benches, that's beneficial to the community, that instead of waiting until the next season, we're doing it now. But I do want to ask, we talked about the mural and how some of the benches are going to be painted. I just want to make sure that we're not, I mean, maybe this is obvious, but I want to make sure we're not having benches painted, you know, to be in accordance with the mural from a visual perspective that are somehow slated to be taken out very, very soon. I'd like to get a few seasons out of those if we can.
The benches that are going to be painted could be here 20 years from now. They're just in massive pieces of concrete. Once they're sandblasted and painted, we'll leave them for as long as they last.
Awesome. That's what I wanted to hear.
So will you add some benches in this? Will you be adding those, Brian?
Budget year?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll order some.
Suggested?
I'll order some tomorrow or Monday, yeah.
Brian, real quick, if we're talking about the possibility of spending additionally from unexpended funds, which we may or may not be doing depending on how much the parking lot costs, are there any play sets that or other elements to any of the parks that are kind of crying out for replacement that should be considered next?
Reba has an ancient play set in the south end of the park.
The fire truck?
No, the fire truck's in the center. It's just to the east of the fire truck.
Oh, to the east. Yeah, in the corner. Yeah.
That would be the next.
Okay, that would be awesome. Debbie?
Yeah, I was just wondering, would it make sense to offer for people to buy benches in memory of people for the parks instead of us spending our money on the benches? I mean, unfortunately, people have lost a lot of people this year. You know, maybe St. Francis would buy a bench. I mean, have we ever tried that?
We haven't tried it, but it has happened. People have come forward. But we can
We could
devise.
put it out in our newsletter or something. Maybe we could try that before we, you know.
I would say that we already established that we're trying to spend as much as we possibly can from this budget for sure. So go ahead as we just discussed, Brian. But I love the idea moving forward, Debbie, that we would offer that to the community because it just seems mutually beneficial that people might actually want to do that, and then that's a bench that we get without paying for it. It's kind of a win-win. So, and the city does that, and it's actually always kind of nice to see a dedication on a bench and just know that that's special to somebody. So I like that idea. Yeah, Debbie.
I just think it's interesting to go to CBDG for, you know, money for play sets and stuff when we could be saving money on things like benches if we approached it like that.
You know,
Oh, sorry, Pat.
the fact that we buy the benches now doesn't mean that somebody couldn't, you know,
Correct.
That's true. Yeah.
have a dedicated bench with a plaque on it.
Yeah.
Same with the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do tree dedications too. And that's a great point, Pat, that like it could be done after the fact. We pay for the bench, but then somebody donates the money and it goes to that, unless there's an accounting problem with that. But that's a good point. Okay, any other comments at this point? We can obviously, you know, keep talking about the budget. So I think we should probably move on unless anybody's, okay. So we had already kind of touched on this, Brian, but we're at the point of discussing increasing petty cash to $6,000. And I do want to explain that further, or should we just move to a vote on that?
Make a motion.
Second.
Julie, go ahead.
Yep. Braun,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Gaines,
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Thanks, Julie.
Mhm.
Okay, next was discussing a plan for future virtual meetings. I'm honestly a little bit confused by the difference between that line item of my own addition and discussing the okay. So I think actually what this relates to, Charlie, help me out here. I think this is where we were just going to establish that unless something changes, we are planning to meet virtually for July.
Exactly. We had discussed that last week.
Okay, and I think, go ahead.
So it's within the discretion of the president of the board to make a decision on whether or not it's practical for us to meet physically or whether we need to meet virtually. And the idea behind this item was just that you could announce what you indicated before, that it's likely that in July you're intending to meet virtually. August, who knows? But right now, looking forward to July, you indicated we're likely to meet virtually.
Right. And so this ties in with the IAPD webinar I participated in again. So the recommendation was that we would weigh relevant factors into our decision, either as a board or just at the president's recommendation. The problem with deciding as a board, if we don't do it in a meeting, is obviously that there is some question as to what we can discuss about those plans without, you know, violating Open Meetings Act. I did find out from Stephen Adams that if we're just talking about the logistics of how we execute a meeting, but not any actual business, that allegedly we are actually allowed to talk about that by email altogether without being in violation. I'm not totally sure if that's 100% the way we want to go about it, especially because here we are tonight in June talking about what we plan for July. You know, I propose that we plan to meet virtually for July, and like Charlie just said, that we will evaluate for August as of the July meeting. I think we only have to give 48 hours notice of what we plan to do. Is that correct? Oh,
yes.
Okay, but obviously for all kinds of reasons, it makes sense to plan more in advance than that. So I think that it's a good practice, unless we see something change, that we discuss, August at our July meeting, which will be virtual. And then the things that we will consider in terms of opening back up again at some point, either August, September, who knows when, is looking at, are the number of new cases increasing in Evanston and around us as a result of people social distancing less, starting to go back to work, et cetera, stores opening up. If not, maybe, we open up sooner rather than later. If we see an increase in cases and we, have limitations on our space, et cetera, we may choose to meet virtually in August, and we'll just make that decision in July. So that's kind of it for that item, unless anybody wanted to speak on that at all. Okay, and then the discussing of the board etiquette, et cetera, we already did that because we moved it up the agenda. On to point E, we've got discuss reviews / raise process in light of COVID-19. So this ties in with what happened last month with Brian's raise, which actually is the next item on the agenda to just confirm the vote that we took. It turns out after discussing the very real possibility, not just possibility, the fact that Natalie's annual review is planned for July, and that there are other staff members who would come up not too soon after, not too long after that, rather. The question was raised, okay, well, we did what we did with Brian. What are we doing next time? What are we doing for annual reviews and raises? Are we going to deal with this individually or set some policy? So it seems like there was some consensus before we could put this to the board that we will actually do something similar, which is to suspend the annual review discussion, which is normally held in closed session. The reason for that is that there are security concerns about going into closed session on Zoom or other software. And we just decided rather than, subject people to their personal information being discussed in a way that might not be secure, we're just going to suspend the annual review part of that process. And we will nonetheless, just like we did with Brian, proceed with raises commensurate with what has happened in the past and, anything relevant relating to performance at Brian's recommendation in advance of those relevant meetings. It was also suggested to me that for Natalie, who I think may have actually had to step out from the meeting for a second, that with her review coming up next month, we could choose to table that, and we can even wait until next month to table it if we feel like it's likely that we could meet in August, simply because physically in August. Simply because then that gives us the opportunity to do the annual review and the raise for Natalie all at one point in person in August, how we otherwise would. The problem, of course, is if we don't meet in August, then we're looking at not just tabling it 1 month, tabling it 2 months. I'm just putting it out there that we could consider that for July. But at this point in time, Natalie's annual review is planned for July. And it would be the plan to go ahead with that in a similar manner to what we did with Brian. Matt?
Thank you. I think that's well thought out. I agree with it. I would just want to be clear when we put it on the agenda that that's what we're going to discuss, so that the public is we're transparent about what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, Matt, because you and I had discussed that, and I was glad that you brought that up because the way that it's worded historically on the agenda is annual review, and so we go into closed session to do that, and usually a raise. A motion for a raise, follows the closed session. If we're literally not doing the annual review at all, it doesn't really make sense to have the annual review be the wording on the agenda. So, I don't know if Charlie, if you want to weigh in for some wording advice there, but what we will be discussing and taking action on is a raise. So.
Yeah. So, when we spoke on the weekend, your thought was to suggest maybe that we just have a standard raise for everybody subject to what turns out in their reviews. And it would be in the budget, and then we could vote on that. The board could vote on that at the next meeting. I'm not sure if that's what your thinking is now or not.
Thank you for the reminder. So yeah, when we were talking about the fact that, well, how do we come up with the exact raise that will be, made in a motion? Partly we can base it on what happened the previous year, but there's just some question about, do we want to standardize that? Do we want to, and Charlie asked a great question, which is, have we budgeted an amount for those raises already? And if so, what was that amount? And the answer is yes, we have, and those are in the budget already. So I think we would probably default to those raises that have already been specified, as opposed to, you know, proactively taking different action. Certainly anyone, you know, can make a motion that differs from that if they so choose. So I think that is the way that we were going to proceed. I'm not quite sure that we have to specify on the agenda the percentage raise, just that we are going to be discussing a raise.
And so that's what I think. I think if that's what you're thinking is, then the next agenda should just be to discuss raises for all staff that haven't had them yet, and leave it at that. And then you can make the specific proposal at the meeting.
I'm not sure if you're suggesting this, but you just gave me the idea that we could even deal with it all at once, because we already know which months they're planned for, and we could even make separate motions that those specific raises would take effect as of those dates. I'm not quite sure that there's a pressing reason to deal with them in advance of when we otherwise would, especially because you never know if we might be able to meet in person and just do the review and the raise at the same time. So I think we should probably stick with just Natalie for next month, because that's what we were planning to do.
Okay.
Unless anyone sees a pressing, you know, need to do everybody. We should ask Brian too. I think it was Ruben and Marcos who were going to be next. I can't remember from our discussion, but if they weren't going to be August, if they were going to be something like September, October, we can cross that bridge when we come to it, I feel like.
Marcos and Ruben are October, November. They're reviews. And sometimes we do them together. You know, the same month.
Okay. So I think we're clear then on that particular agenda item, and we'll just plan to have Natalie's on the agenda for next month with the option of tabling it if we see fit to just plan for trying to do it in person in August instead. Especially since, as we all know, the raises are retroactive to the date that the annual review was supposed to happen. So postponing it doesn't actually mean that that there's a delay or a lack of the substance to the raise. So next on the agenda would be discussing the confirmation of Brian Rosinski's raise. As I mentioned, Pat made the motion last month to propose a particular raise. We did vote on it and it passed. There was some question about you know, the clarity of the vote itself, especially since one of the votes did amount to an abstention. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page and proceeding with that, and you know, going into the future in a comfortable way with that, we're going to vote again, or vote to confirm the vote we already took. Is there a way I need to word that specifically, Charlie?
So I think you're making a motion to ratify the board's prior action. And then
I'll make a motion to ratify the board's prior action.
Second from Coin. Second from Coin.
Thank you, Dan. So we'll go to Julie for a roll call vote.
Ron,
Yes.
Coin,
Yes.
Yes.
McCourt,
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Thanks, Julie.
Mhm.
Okay, so we are now at call of the commissioners.
Oh, sorry. You said that we could do new business during new business, right?
I'm not totally clear, Dan, on what it is that you're saying was like proposed as a practice during a meeting that I was not a part of. I'd just like some confirmation from somebody else that.
Well, let me clarify what I was saying.
Sure.
What we agreed on and what we practiced the last few years is that if any commissioner has new business that's not on the agenda, that's printed, they can add that agenda. It's just they can't take action for it. That's all.
Pat?
You know, it's 11 o'clock. I don't think we need to be doing any new business tonight. I think it's time to wrap this meeting up.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Debbie?
I feel the same way. It's like really late. It's hard to concentrate. Yeah, I mean, to bring up stuff that isn't even on here now, new business, put it on the agenda for next month.
Well, that actually was going to be my compromise because I feel the same way. But I would like to add the new business item G, which is a discussion about the Illinois Parks Act, specifically the dissolution aspect of it that I emailed to everybody. And I don't have to discuss it tonight, and I would like to talk about it next week. But to help our community have a better idea what that is, I would like that included, that specific act of dissolution with park districts on our minutes and also in our packet next month.
Okay, so Debbie, I'll call on you in just a second. I just want to be clear with you, Dan, that when you said just now that you wanted to add some new business, I was looking for some confirmation from other people who have been on the board for longer than I have for the second time. Matt and I were just elected, and this is Matt's first time on the board, and this did not happen when I was on the board last. So I'm just not clear, and I'm not comfortable with proceeding with something that we have not done at any of the meetings in this past year that I've been on the board. Nobody has ever brought up adding new business. So the fact that you're mentioning it now, given that there's new business you want to add, when we haven't established that that's what we're doing, I'm not totally clear on whether or not that's even been an approved practice, because I haven't seen it. And so I was looking for, some clarity from somebody else, and or some clarity from Charles. So I think I'd like to go to Charles first, Debbie, before I hear from you, if that's okay with you. Because I really don't even know if this is allowed, if this is a practice that's done elsewhere. I'd like some clarity there, Charlie, before we proceed.
Yeah, I can't speak as to the policy because I was never present at a meeting where that was discussed as being the policy for new business. It's fine if the board wants to proceed that way. I don't think there's anything wrong with it because nothing's being called. And in fact, Commissioner Coyne indicated he wasn't going to call any questions now. He's basically doing what he would do next week by calling Natalie and asking her to put it on new business for next time, which I think is fine.
Okay. So the only additional piece, though, beyond what we all already know to be the procedure for adding something to the agenda, which is that you contact Natalie outside of a meeting and ask that it be added. This is like an additional piece that's being suggested that we add to new business at the end of new business, that people can talk about additional new business. I do understand it to be allowed that, at any point, whether we're following this particular practice or not, that anyone can add something to the agenda as long as action is not taken and it's just discussion. But one thing I'd love clarity on is, do they need a second? Do we need to vote? Or is it as simple as they can just propose that and go about it? So some clarity there too, Charlie, would be helpful.
Yeah, so there's no vote required. He's announced it. It's the same as if he told Natalie next week that he wants it on the agenda. I do think it would be a good idea if some point in the future, somebody were to put in writing exactly what the thought process is behind new business so that new board members can read that and know what it is in the future. But for now, I think we're fine. Natalie will put it on the agenda for next time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a concern about the lack of transparency to the public here if we were to proceed with discussion, because there was not notice to the public about this particular item. I understand that even according to the Open Meetings Act, it is allowed that we would discuss something without taking action. So again, I'm very clear that we can allow for that. I just don't think it's a good practice for us to get into. There's a reason that there's a deadline to get to Natalie to add something to the agenda so that there's ample public notice that's given. I think we all agree that transparency to the public is a very firm goal of ours. So I'd say unless something is so timely that you didn't have the ability to meet the deadline that we all otherwise know to be in existence on a standing basis, that we refrain from adding new business, especially at the end of a lengthy meeting, if it's not something pressing. We're already under the governor's recommendation to only do essential business. I don't view a discussion of dissolving the park district to be essential business. really at all. I actually further understand it to be something that the board is not in a position to take any action on or need to take any action on. It's not something that's even up to us. And furthermore, I would venture to speak for 4 out of 5 of us that that's not an action we support taking at all, to say the least. So, you know, I have a problem with that particular thing being added right now in the event that we would be discussing it. If Dan simply wants it noted in the minutes that he wants to discuss it next month, that's fine with me, and I think we've achieved that. So I'm not comfortable with moving with discussion. Pat, were you about to talk? The box went over to your screen.
No.
No, okay. Debbie, did you want to say something?
No, actually, I wanted to know the legality of adding something to the, and Charlie answered it. Thank you.
Okay. So then we are moving on then from new business to call of the commissioners, and we've been going in alphabetical order so far. So I will put it to Debbie Braun first.
Well, I would like to say that I have had several, more than several calls and seeing people on the street that have just commented on how incredible Ridgeville has been during this, you know, whole thing, and thanks to Natalie, and that they're finding things for their kids to do, their programs, they're free, and as well as thanking for the open green space where a family can go have a picnic. A mom and 2 kids can go have lunch, you know, even with everything else. They can't play on the equipment, but I just want to emphasize how much Ridgeville means to the community, especially in this time. Thank you.
Thank you. So then we would go next to Commissioner Coyne.
Yes, thank you. I was going to read a letter from Doctors Witherspoon and Campbell about our current events regarding a need to be a better anti-racist community. But I would just ask permission, instead of reading it, to just add it as part of our minutes, and that way the community can read it as well.
I think that's a great suggestion. I support the linking people to that information that's out there, as well as not going into those details right now, just in the interest of time. Commissioner Coyne, would you be saying anything additional for your section, or you're good? Okay. So then alphabetically, that would bring it to me. I just want to take this time really briefly to say that in light of the suggestion from Commissioner Coyne last meeting, that was accompanied by a link to the state code that talks about dissolving a park district, and then was further amplified by an article, I guess you would call it, in Evanston Now about this idea of dissolving the park district. I don't want to speak too much. It's late. I've already spoken a lot, but I'm really upset by the suggestion that the park district should dissolve. I wish it wasn't so late and I weren't tired and I hadn't talked so much, because I have so much to say about how awesome Ridgeville is. And I think I speak for so many in the community, and definitely many of the board members here, that this is an awesome institution in many ways. It doesn't mean we're perfect, but in some of the ways that we need to be working to be better, we're taking more steps than ever before in those ways, such as racial equity. And, you know, certainly nobody saw this pandemic coming. It's not our fault. So the fact that we had to cancel all of our awesome programming that was going to be better than ever before, and that Natalie worked so hard to put it all together, it's really a shame. But of course, you know, that's not at all an indication of, you know, what our normal contributions are to the community, which are normally immense and positive and great, and involve so many different people of different ages, races, backgrounds, interests, etc. So I'm just really upset by the idea that we should dissolve, because it couldn't be farther from the truth of what our future holds. We're better and stronger and more awesome than ever before, and we're in a position, especially with the support of active, positive board members, to move forward and be even better than we are now. So that's what I see in our future, and I look forward to that. That's it for me. Next would be Commissioner McCourt.
I agree with what you just said, Martha, and I also noted that we refunded $81,000 this month to people that rely on Ridgeville and depend on Ridgeville and trust Ridgeville. And I think that's not only a testament to Natalie and Brian and everybody associated with the active management of our resources and Ridgeville. So I think that's a testament in and of itself that our clientele and the residents of Ridgeville depend on Ridgeville to add an element of, enjoyment to their lives. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks, Pat. And so now we're going to Commissioner Mitchell.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Dr. Effiam and the Ready Committee for the work they've been doing. I've really enjoyed the trainings personally. I've really enjoyed Dr. Effiam's organized effort and the Ready Committee to lead the Ridgeville Park District in these difficult anti-racism conversations and actions. So thank you. I look forward to seeing that work keep going.
Thank you, Commissioner Mitchell. So we would now be in citizen comment. I'm not quite sure if we have anyone who wants to speak, but I know that we do have some people on the screen at least that are not commissioners or staff. So I just want to open that up to citizen comment. And I'll just give it another second in case there's any technology in the way. Okay, and if anybody wants to come back online for the purpose of sort of drawing this meeting to a close with the visuals on so that we know you're there, you don't have to, but I just want to invite you to do that. Because in the absence of any additional citizen comments, we will, hi Natalie. Hi Julie. We will vote to adjourn, and even adjournment will be a roll call vote. So we'll move to that now. I move that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay.
Ron?
Yes. Yes, sorry.
Coyne?
Yes.
Baines?
Yes.
McCourt?
Yes.
And Mitchell?
Yes.
Hooray.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
A long
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Night.